All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Dr. John Bergsma, thank you for bringing a library of books with you.
It is my pleasure.
And Josiah is just going to walk around on the ground like this.
And
the best was when Jordan Peterson was here and he was doing this. It's like a very subservient kind of position. I make him get on his hands and knees.
And he lets
part of it. Oh, I didn't do the thing. That's what I'm talking about. How's that for casual?
I'm really impressed with
We're keeping all this in.
Professionalism.
That's right. We need another one. We need someone else. We need someone prettier, no offense, than you to click that. Yeah. No, it's okay.
No, we're good. We're good with that.
It's hot, but it's
not that hot.
Okay, I got to ask, why this many books?
They're kind of like memory jogs, and it's like a comfort thing.
Comfort blanket.
Yeah,
Some
comfort
people
blanket.
have a comfort blanket. You have
it's like
50 books.
I have them. They remind me of where to go in case I have a Biden moment.
Yeah.
And
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And some of them I want to wave around, like if because I want to I view myself as a facilitator, and I'll say this too during the show.
Oh, this is the show.
Oh, this is the show.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Isn't this great? That's what I said. Super casual.
Okay. Yeah. So I view myself as a facilitator. So like, I'm not an expert in all these different areas. I'm a generalist.
Yeah.
I can read them with appreciation and understanding, but then I want to direct people to useful resources. Many of our viewers are going to be strong in different areas of science and probably out of my depth. So it's like, go to these experts.
Well, I said this to you earlier before we were here that it's only experts who realize they're not experts in certain areas.
Yes,
this is true. People like me, like lay people, like we're pretty sure we know everything about everything.
Right.
I mean, that's not true, but it's usually the people with a Ph.D. in something who realize just how difficult it is to be an expert in a particular area, and then you realize just how much you mustn't know about these other things.
Right. I think I heard some joke about, when an Australian man goes into a bar after a couple of drinks, he's an expert. A couple pints, he's an expert
100%. I don't think that just applies to Australians. I'm pretty sure.
Physics.
Yeah, sit down, buckle up. Yeah.
I think it's true of the British as well. And
not Americans.
Oh yeah, probably.
Yeah,
but we don't have the cool accent. Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
You teach a class on this or something like this?
I do. Yeah, I teach a course on religion and science. Sometimes it's called faith and science. Sometimes it's called every other year up at Franciscan. And I got into it because when I went to the University of Notre Dame to get a doctorate in Scripture, they said, okay, you've got to take a major in Old Testament, because that was my preferred field. Your minor has to be in New Testament. And then you have a free minor to do in anything you want. It could be psychology, it could be biology if you want. And I was like, great, I'm going to do philosophy. So our good friend, Alvin Plantinga.
Please tell me a story about your time with him.
Alvin Plantinga. So, yes, Alvin Plantinga went to the same Dutch Calvinist church that I did when I went to Notre Dame, because I came as a Dutch Calvinist and left as a Catholic.
Yeah.
He was actually one of the elders at the church. So he kind of observed my movement into Catholicism from a distance. And we've had a few delicate conversations about it. I think he asked me once why I became Catholic, and I said, well, it's a testimony of the Church Fathers. And he said, that sounds like a good reason. He said. So he was always a kind of an avuncular figure for me, a grandfatherly character and a mentor. Let me think. A story about Plantinga. In philosophy, there are these problems in epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge called Gettier problems, where your belief is justified and true, but the justification that you think your belief has is actually false, and there's a different justification that is valid. And so the question is, does that constitute knowledge? Because the classic definition of knowledge in philosophy is justified true belief.
Right. Just real quick, so if I said there's an even number of stars, that might be a true belief, but it's not justified.
Right.
Yeah.
You'd have to count them. Right. Right. But if you found some kind of, mathematical formula that determined that there can only be an even number of stars,
then it would be justified.
Then it would be justified true belief, and it'd be knowledge. Right. So at the time I was taking this course in epistemology with Plantinga, I was also raising children. I had 4 of them at home. And there's a whole sequence of semi-comical children's books called the Moon Bear series, where this bear character goes through experiences where he has surreal experiences which he interprets in the wrong way. So, for example, in one of the Moon Bear books, he has conversations with the moon, and it just so happens that the echoes of his own voice make sense, such that he can interpret his reality in such a way that the moon is actually communicating to him. And in another episode, he wakes up one morning and gets his friend, and he thinks he's dreaming, and they see this big kangaroo, which is like this monstrous mouse. He interprets it as a monstrous mouse, and so on. So he thinks he's in a dream world. So since he's in a dream world, he messes up his whole home, and he says, well, we're just going to wake ourselves up and the home will be cleaned up. Well, the big mouse turns out to be a kangaroo. The zookeeper finds a kangaroo and then notices that the whole house is a mess. So the zookeeper cleans up the whole house. So they wake themselves up. They go back, and the house is all cleaned up, saying it was a dream. Okay, so all the evidence that they're getting fits their interpretive paradigm.
Yeah.
And even though reality is different, so that's actually not quite a Gettier problem, but it's an interesting kind of epistemological difficulty where you have a false interpretive paradigm that keeps getting confirmed.
Yes, that is. You begin with false premises, and you're led into this, as you say, paradigm, and everything's justifying it. Right. It would be like if I had the belief that every time I woke up I was a new person or something.
Right.
There's probably a way to make that very coherent. Or if I believe that the universe was created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age, food in my stomach I never ate, that's coherent. That works.
There we go. Yeah.
Good reason to think it true or not.
Yeah.
So when it comes to God, I think a lot of atheists would say something like, you've made your story coherent. Congratulations. But Star Wars is coherent. So appealing to different things within that kind of epistemological paradigm, all you're doing is showing that it's coherent. You're not actually showing that it's true. Right.
Yeah, that's true. But and this becomes a question in epistemology because you've got Thomas Kuhn, right? You're familiar with Thomas Kuhn? Okay, so paradigms, right? You have this interpretive paradigm. Those Moon Bear books are good for that because he has this interpretive paradigm that's false but keeps getting confirmed. And so, in the philosophy of science, you get radical Kuhnians who say that all there is paradigms. And this is what you see in postmodernism, like in various forms of wokeism, where, gender is just a paradigm, right? There isn't really male and female. A woman is whatever you define it to be, etc.
And then they seek to try to make coherence within this ideology.
Right, but then you get a phenomena that's called nature pushing back.
Yeah.
So you adopt this paradigm that gender is just a construct. You try to make it work, but then you find that all the surgeries and the hormones.
You keep running into reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. So I did a doctoral minor in philosophy, focusing especially on religion and science and epistemology under Plantinga. And that got me into reading widely in scientific literature. And we looked at a lot of the flashpoints between religion and science, things like creation, the fine-tuning of the universe, evolution and its implications, quantum mechanics, out-of-body experiences, and so on. So we looked at all those things from a philosophical perspective and read people we read people on both sides. So that's where I first read, say, Dawkins and Daniel Dennett.
Yeah.
These guys that were, part of the four horsemen of the apocalypse back when the new atheists were really cool, maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I first read those in Plantinga's class, and going into the class, Matt, I was frankly scared because I knew we were going to read these guys, and I thought, what if I read Richard Dawkins and lose my faith? Or what if I read Daniel Dennett and he persuades me not to be a Christian anymore? But it was such a liberating experience because we read these guys and we analyzed them. And as you know, Plantinga is an analytical philosopher, so he's all about breaking down arguments. Mm-hmm. And so we'd look at these guys and actually break their arguments down. And as we did that, the arguments would dissipate. And that was such a liberating experience. I felt, wow, I can be an intellectually self-confident Christian.
I find I have this analogy. Josiah, would you bring me that printed page at some point too? I have this analogy that arguments for atheism are sort of like what would you say? Thank you. Maybe I'm getting this backwards, but think of a seagull or a flock of seagulls on a beach. You run through them as a kid and they scatter. If they were to turn on you, you would be terrified. And I think it's something like that with like theistic beliefs, like where all you got to do is turn around and like actually face the objections head on, like the seagull faces the child.
Right.
I mean, it's not a very good analogy now that I'm saying it. I'm realizing that. But the point is, as I turned and looked at these arguments, I was like you too. I remember feeling really afraid to read Dawkins.
Right.
I felt very destabilized because he would use this graphic, heated language, like teaching your children religion is child abuse.
Right.
And you're like, oh gosh, I don't want to do that.
It's intimidating. Right. It's rhetorical intimidation.
Yeah. But I did find that when I read him, I thought, oh my goodness, this is it?
Right.
Now, to be fair to atheists, even atheists look at his book and say that. So
Yeah, he's maybe not the best proponent. But I got one of his books here, Blind Watchmaker, and just was reading through this. And if you know the science already and aren't simply getting your science from him, you realize he's making mistakes.
Okay.
And has weak arguments. And in fact, I thought maybe to write to him and say, hey, a couple different pages here, you gotta fix your facts. Just in charity. But anyway, that's the point is, that. And so having had that experience under Plantinga, I've always wanted to share that with my own students. And what I find is, I'm a Bible scholar. I love scripture. I do biblical apologetics and defend the scriptures, et cetera. But oftentimes I find that with certain individuals, I can't even get to square one, because they don't want to read biblical revelation because they think that the very idea of God is irrational to begin with. So I have gotten into the area of religion and science, the area of evidences for God, as a preparation for talking about Scripture. So when I'm dealing with, and also to teach my students, and I try to work these arguments and these evidences into even my courses on Scripture, because they're going to be in situations in the parish when they've got a bunch of high schoolers, right? And some of those high schoolers are going to be usually male, and they're going to be science geeks, and they're going to have that attitude like from Nacho Libre, I believe in science, right? That scene. And have you seen the movie?
I have. I love that movie.
Yeah, I love that movie. I believe in science. Okay, so they're going to have, you're going to have high schoolers in your youth group who maybe parents are making them come, et cetera, that are going to have that attitude. And you need to have something to offer them. You need to have a little bit of depth so that you don't find that intimidating, and that you can offer them, hey, what about this line of argument from natural science, or this, not a good explanation for that, just in terms of matter and energy. Don't you think that it points to, an intelligence, a non-material actor in the universe, etc.?
This is tough, because to go back to what we said a moment ago, we're both in these, what do we call them? Something paradigms, like epistemological paradigms,
right,
that we're all trying to make coherent. But the thing is, with any worldview, there's always going to be things that don't fit quite as well as you would like to have them fit.
Right.
Consciousness for the atheist, the problem of evil for the theist.
Right.
So we're kind of in these like two bubbles trying to tell the other person why their paradigm doesn't work. And so you've got two people in two epistemological paradigms. That's a difficult thing to do. The atheist might think the Christian is as nuts as the man who says, no, Star Wars actually is real. Like that's how it appears, maybe. Right. And the Christian feels likewise. He looks at the atheist and just thinks, yeah, you're dead wrong here. Like, yeah, I see how you're trying to make everything fit. You're using evolution maybe as a substitute for the word God. And then you've got the Christian who appeals to mystery and the atheist berates him. And then you say, well, what about like the beginning of the universe? Isn't it the case that matter, time, space, and energy came into being? Well, maybe, the atheist says. And then the atheist appeals to mystery. We don't know enough yet. We may one day. Maybe there's a multiverse. And so we've got both people, two different intellectual paradigms, appealing to mystery to make up for the gaps in their worldview. So how do we even...
Have a common conversation? Is that the idea?
Yeah, or how does reality hit one of us in the head then? To use that analogy we used earlier.
Yeah. Well, nature does push back, and that's why I like this field, and that's why I got all these books here, because many of these books are from people who are not believers, and so the most powerful testimonies that I find are where somebody confesses that a hard fact, a hard piece of data, doesn't work with their paradigm. And that's called testimony against interest, in legal terminology. So this is where you can get somebody whose sympathies are really for, I don't know, the prosecution, but he confesses that, oh yeah, the defendant, really is an honest guy or something like that. And so, one of my favorite books, Robert Jastrow, Jastrow was, kind of, a rocket scientist among rocket scientists, right? So he's head of Goddard. I think it was the Goddard Institute for, Space Studies or something like this. And, arguably America's top rocket scientist from maybe say 1960 to 1980. And to his dying day, he was an agnostic. Like he refused to, embrace theism. And yet he writes this book about the theistic implications of the Big Bang. Yeah. And he can sound like an outright theist at certain, in certain chapters, and you might think that he was, but then, you check out some of the interviews of him that are on YouTube, and, till his death, he was kind of like, well, I'm caught between...
Do you remember the quote from that book where he talks about pulling back the final boulder and you find a band of theologians who'd been sitting there?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. And to just give that context, sure. What Jastrow is talking about is...
see if I can find it.
Yeah, no, I know where it is.
Okay.
It's right before the epilogue. Yeah. Here's the... he talks about the Big Bang coming to the point where it looks like a point of creation. God spoke and there was light. It's kind of a semi-adequate description of the Big Bang. So that's what it looks like. Okay, that's just common sense interpretation, right? And he remarks on it. He says, this is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all but the theologians. And he goes on to talk about how they had always, accepted God's word in Genesis at a moment of creation. And then he comes back and he says, now we would like to pursue that inquiry farther back in time, the inquiry about, the origins of things. But the barrier to further progress seems insurmountable when you hit the Big Bang. It's not a matter of another year, another decade of work, another measurement, or another theory. At this moment, it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries.
Wow. Yeah, that's...
What a confession. And
as an agnostic.
As an agnostic. And you think, when I first read the book, I think I was 12 years old or something when I first read that.
It doesn't surprise me that 12-year-old Bergsma was reading that book. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think I was
barely reading comic books at 12.
Yeah, I remember being in Walden Books and picking it up and slowly reading pretty much the whole thing without ever buying the book. Anyway, so when I first read it, I thought, oh, well, he's a theist, maybe he's a Christian. I find out, no, he's not. So what an amazing confession. So I love, I got a bunch of other, Stephen Hawking makes some very revealing confessions. Richard Dawkins makes some really revealing confessions. So I don't agree that we're in two bubbles and that we can't communicate with each other. I do think that hard facts like Big Bang cosmology, which implies that space, time, energy all had a beginning. And therefore, if they have a cause, which is kind of demanded by logic, that cause has to be outside of space, time, and energy. And then, we can talk about what else can we know about that cause. Well, the universe seems incredibly well designed, so the cause must be very intelligent, and the universe is very big, so the cause must be very powerful. So it seems like we have a highly intelligent, all-powerful cause, which is outside of space, time, and energy. Sounds like the classical definition of God, okay? And somebody might say, well, you only think that because you're a Christian, you're raised in the church. But no, non-Christians can feel the force, the theistic force of that argument. So Jastrow was an agnostic to his death. He felt the theistic force of Big Bang cosmology. He writes a whole book about it. Others felt the force as well. Sir Fred Hoyle, the greatest astrophysicist in Britain in the 20th century, who was knighted for his contributions to astrophysics, he resisted Big Bang cosmology because he did not want a universe that had a beginning. Yeah. Einstein didn't want a universe that had a beginning, and maybe you know the story of the origins of Big Bang.
Share them.
Yeah. So in early 1900s, Einstein is mathematically modeling the universe. He's coming up with his theories of general relativity and special relativity. Yeah, relativity. Mm-hmm. And you've got Father Georges Lemaitre, a Jesuit priest in Belgium, who takes Einstein's math and starts working on them and realizes that his mathematics imply that the universe is expanding. So Lemaitre calls this the primeval atom. He points out that if you regress the universe according to Einstein's math, it means like rewind the clock on the universe, everything contracts down to a beginning. So Lemaitre, this Jesuit Belgian priest, begins to publish papers showing that it looks like, according to Einstein's mathematics, that the universe expanded from a point, and that's the beginning of Big Bang cosmology. So Lemaitre starts publishing those things in the 1920s, and in the very early 30s, you've got Edwin Hubble, an American astronomer at Mount Wilson Observatory in California. He's looking out at the stars, and he begins to realize, all the galaxies are moving away. They're all expanding. So the universe looks like it's expanding. And it's expanding at the rate that Lemaitre's calculations predict, okay? So these two things come together. Now, in the meanwhile, Lemaitre and Einstein were in communication, and Einstein famously said, or at least he's attributed to have said to Lemaitre, your math is great, but your physics are abominable. Okay. It's like, yeah, I see that your equations work, but the idea of the whole universe going back to a point, that's just like, there's like a visceral rejection of that, Yeah. And so Einstein took Lemaitre's mathematics and introduced a constant into the formula to keep the universe from expanding, because Einstein wanted a steady state universe. He wanted a universe without a beginning. Yep. Because a universe without a beginning enables you to say that the universe is the one necessary being.
There you go, yeah.
Which you and I know about from working with Thomas's proofs, this is the first proof, the second proof from motion, from causality. They both lead you back to an unmoved mover,
right,
an uncaused cause. Father Spitzer calls this the single unconditioned reality, right? So if you have an eternal universe, you can just say, oh, I don't need a God.
Yeah.
The universe can be my unconditioned reality. The universe can be my unmoved mover.
Bedrock,
right. And Einstein wanted that. So Einstein resisted Lemaitre's arguments and introduced a constant into his formulas to keep the universe stable. All right. Now, when Hubble had these observations that matched Lemaitre's math, then Einstein gave up and started to be open to, what we now call Big Bang cosmology. Now, where do we get the term Big Bang? Big Bang was actually a term of contempt invented by Sir Fred Hoyle. He was on a BBC interview, I think in the 50s, and he said something to the effect of, I don't like this Big Bang cosmology, this idea that the universe had a start, a beginning.
Yeah.
And so he came up with that term, but the term stuck, as often happens in science. And so what began as a term of contempt. But the question is, why did Hoyle have such contempt for this idea? And the answer is ultimately philosophical and religious. He didn't like a universe with a beginning either. He wanted the steady state universe, which he maintained to his death. No beginning, no end. Therefore, the universe can be your necessary being. You don't need a God. And Hoyle, interestingly, struggled with theism all his life. And it's unclear what exactly he believed about God. Maybe somebody knows. Maybe somebody's got a biography on him. I've read a lot of stuff on him without ever reaching clarity on what did he go to his deathbed believing. But he also made these fantastic confessions. I mean, later in this interview, maybe we'll talk about cosmic fine-tuning. But he looked at all of the mathematics behind the universe, and he has this famous quote that he gave at an address once where he says, a common sense interpretation of the facts would suggest that a super intellect has monkeyed with the laws of physics and chemistry, and that there are no blind forces in the universe. I mean, what a great confession from a guy who, again, that's testimony against interest. He was not a Christian, not a practicing religious person, resisted theistic implications, and yet was kind of forced by the data to admit that. And I really like the way he phrases it, a common sense interpretation. Because one of the things I want to communicate in our discussion together, Matt, is that what I try to impart to my students is the sense that the common sense interpretation of reality, when we look at the scientific evidence, is that there is a creator. That's what everybody kind of perceives intuitively. And it's not Christians who run away from common sense into abstract argumentation, etc. It's actually atheists who end up fleeing from the evidence into a refuge of abstract mathematics and wild theories like the multiverse and so on to get away from the testimony of common sense. So again, Hoyle, Britain's greatest astrophysicist, what is it? A common sense interpretation. That means kind of the prima facie impression that you have, the initial intuition that human reason that's working properly, like Plantinga would talk about the proper
cognitive functioning.
Yeah, proper cognitive functioning. When you look at all this evidence, you would come to the conclusion that there's an intellect behind this, a super intellect behind this that's designing everything. So that was quite a rant that I just went on.
It was a very interesting rant. Are modern cosmologists and astrophysicists making claims that are against self-interest today? Or have we learned a lot more since Robert Jastrow lived and wrote, such that the Big Bang Theory really doesn't provide as good evidence for the beginning of the universe as we perhaps once thought? Because that's the objection, hey? Like, that's the objection that the atheist gives. They say, all right, look, we used to think that thunder or lightning was God angry with us or something like this. All right, so in 100,000 years, if humanity still exists, we might look back on what we considered the beginning of the universe to be as silly, and to say, well, that was evidence for God's existence, as silly as saying that thunder is God being angry.
Yeah. No, that argument doesn't work at all. Okay, it's just completely fallacious, because in the Darwin is what 1850s, right, roughly. Okay, so it's 2024. So however many years that's been, I don't do good mathematical calculations in real time, but it's been hundreds of years since Darwin. What is that? 175 years, I think, roughly, right?
I'm not even going to try
2025. Yeah,
screw it up.
So
it's been a minute.
Whatever. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been over a century. And actually, in that time, the growth of our knowledge has improved and refined the arguments for theism, so that they're much stronger today than they were in Darwin's day. So our growth in knowledge has not led us away from theistic thought. It keeps bringing us back to theistic thought.
But in appealing to Darwin, it sounds like you're getting into the territory of the fossil record, the origin of life. But what I'm trying to do is I want to stick on the Big Bang Theory, and then we'll move from there. So are you familiar with modern cosmologists?
Yeah.
Astrophysicists, are they still saying this sort of stuff? Is it still an awkward fact?
Or
does it seem less awkward because the theory of the multiverse has become more sophisticated and therefore seemingly possible?
Right. Well, I was rereading Jastrow the other day, and I was surprised at how everything that's going on in the contemporary conversation is pretty much anticipated already in his book. So already he writes this in 78, and he's already talking about the possibility of a multiverse, and he also talks about why it probably doesn't work. And it's pretty much the same thing today, okay? So, an update, I would really recommend this book to our
New
viewers.
Proofs for the Existence of God
by Father Spitzer. Yeah, Father Robert Spitzer. Wonderful book, very dense, very tough reading at parts, but worth working through. And so if people want to go do a deep dive into why doesn't the multiverse work, why not an oscillating universe, why not different possibilities, Spitzer, does that deep dive and can give you all that data and all that evidence. And so, and another book I'd recommend is Stephen Meyer, Return of the God Hypothesis. He goes into some of that material as well. And I would say no, Jastrow's initial reaction to the Big Bang, it holds true to this day. Yes, Stephen Hawking went to his grave resisting the theistic implications of Big Bang cosmology and trying to come up with a mathematical explanation of how it could be that, despite the fact that Einstein's mathematics, special and general relativity, go back to this point, but Hawking was working on theoretical math that would allow, some kind of pre-existent universe. Okay, he never pulled it together by the end. It's kind of like, it reminds me of laying a carpet. You know how when you're trying to lay a carpet and it's too short on one side, so you get that carpet kicker, and you pull it over there, but then that pulls up on the other side. A lot of times when you're trying to get math to work, it's like that. It's like I can get the math to work over here, but it's pulling up the math over there. And so Hawking was just trying to lay the carpet of mathematical theory that would get around, and he never succeeded. And right now, let's see, Roger Penrose is trying to do that. Trying to come up with a mathematical explanation for a kind of an oscillating universe that would be like a universe that has a beginning and then expands, but then somehow becomes the cause of another universe that lasts thereafter. Okay,
kind of like when you blow a bubble and a bubble comes out of it.
Yeah, something like that, but a whole chain so that we're just in one eon of a continually oscillating universe that had no beginning and has no end.
Well, there's also the idea, correct me if this is different or not, but the idea of the big crunch. So we have the expansion of the universe, which will eventually crunch in on itself and then just keep going back and forth.
Right. Yeah. And the problem with that is we're not crunching. In fact, the newest evidence shows that we're actually expanding even faster than we thought. So the current evidence shows we're never going to crunch. We came from apparently a point, and it's going to continue to expand, and the math and the evidence does not point to an eventual recollapse. It didn't in Jastro's day. Already people were proposing that back in 78, and Jastrow in this book says, no, there's not enough gravity to pull everything back. It looks like everything's going to expand and we're not going to come back. Because that would be nice for some people. Some people like to have bang, crunch, bang, crunch.
Yeah.
Okay. Spitzer explains...
Because then you've got an infinite universe.
Yeah. And Spitzer explains why that doesn't work.
Okay.
Because you still got the second law of thermodynamics, and so things are going to wind down.
Yeah.
You know, and even apart from Big Bang cosmology, even just based on the second law, and the second law, states that, as matter and energy go through time, entropy always increases. Entropy is disorder. Okay, so you're always moving from a state of more order to less order. And some people think that that's what time is. Time is the moving of things from order to disorder. But anyway, we don't.
My body agrees with that.
I feel that very much.
Yeah. So I want to ask two questions that I think will help people understand what cosmologists talk about when they talk about the Big Bang. And they're two questions that don't work, but it shows what we mean when we talk about the Big Bang. What happened before the Big Bang?
Yeah. Well, a good question. I don't think it's a bad question. But Einstein's math points that there's no time before the Big Bang.
So it's like asking what's north of the North Pole.
Yeah. You reach this point and that's it. So whatever is before the Big Bang is outside of time. Okay, and that's how we have traditionally thought about God. So again, you want to, The Big Bang really lends itself to the Kalam argument. Did William Lane Craig do the Kalam argument when you had him on?
Of course.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Actually, you got to watch this. I had Jimmy Aiken debate William Lane Craig on the Kalam argument, but they focused solely on the philosophical evidence.
Okay.
Jimmy strenuously disagrees with Craig. He agrees with the Kalam argument. I mean, he agrees with the premises and the conclusion, but he doesn't think the philosophical version gets you there.
Oh, interesting.
Which is interesting. I'd love to get the two of you talking together.
Yeah. I'll have to look at that.
But certainly from a scientific point of view.
Right. So, anything, the Kalam argument is anything that comes into existence has to have had a cause other than itself. That's the first premise.
Right.
The minor premise is the universe has come into existence. That's what we know from the Big Bang. And so the conclusion is, well, then the universe had to have a cause other than itself. All right. So again, Einstein's math shows, before the Big Bang, if you want to even use that term before, okay, there is no space, time, matter, or energy.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there is a cause of the universe, then it's got to be very powerful. It has to be very intelligent because
immaterial.
Yep. And it has to be outside of space. It has to be immaterial. So, this is this is the way we've conceived of God in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So again, very strong.
But what's fascinating about the Kalam argument is obviously the Kalam argument predates all of this, our understanding of Big Bang cosmology. It's something that Bonaventure was a proponent of, that Aquinas engaged with. So if you are one of these people who hold the Kalam argument based on philosophical grounds, and then this scientific argument comes along, it just... It makes the argument all the stronger. There's two strands now.
Yeah. It makes it very strong. And again, it's not just people that are predisposed to be religious or to believe in God that feel the force of that. You have Einstein and Hoyle trying to avoid. And another thing I want to mention, that's when we read about the history of science, you see that non-scientific motivations come into play and motivate how scientists go about their work. And Jastrow documents that. It's not me saying this, Jastrow documents how a lot of astrophysicists didn't like the way things were going with the development of Big Bang cosmology, and said outright, I find this reprehensible, or I really don't want this to be true, etc. So I think that's a very important point to get across, especially to students, etc. People are getting formed and trying to make sense of the world, that the scientific enterprise does not consist of a bunch of people that are completely unmotivated and completely objective and just follow the truth wherever it leads. Now, I'm not criticizing people in natural science, but I am saying they're humans like the rest of us, and we all have ulterior motives. We all have views of the world that we would like to reaffirm, and we all have to be conscious of that, and try to avoid just believing things that we want to believe, and try to follow the truth where it leads, as it were.
And then at the same time, realizing that just because I want something to be true doesn't mean it's false.
That's true too.
Yeah. So I might find the idea of atheism comforting.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I'm afraid of hell.
Yeah.
And maybe atheism's true. And I might like the idea of a providential, all-good God, and that brings me comfort. But just because it brings me comfort doesn't mean I go, well, therefore I have to hold that in a great degree of skepticism.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Right. And I think that we can communicate. I think that, as I said, nature pushes back. Nature gives us data that we can struggle and talk about. Yeah, and I hope that that this conversation leads to further conversations. And I would love, people... hopefully people watching this will want to converse with me about some of these things, and we can converse about them as Catholics. And some of the things that we may end up talking about are controversial even within Catholic academic circles. But I think that we should be able to converse about them with charity, and seek the truth together. And where the Church has not declared dogmatically something to be the case, we have the freedom to talk about it and seek truth together. But, trying to cancel one another, going ad hominem on one another, this is not helpful. But I see that happen even in Catholic academia, and it's unfortunate.
Before we move on to say evidence for fine-tuning, and what that might indicate, namely a fine-tuner. Quick question, should Catholics be putting much stock in scientific evidence, since science, being a matter of induction, is always open to revision? And so if you were to perhaps rely too heavily on the scientific evidence for the beginning of a universe and say that points to God, well, if that's one day overthrown, and you wouldn't sit here and say that's not possible, would you?
Well, any scientific theory that we have about the universe is going to end up showing that it has a beginning of the material universe. I don't anticipate that being overthrown.
Right, but that's different to saying it's impossible that it be overthrown. It would seem to me that we have more, we can take more refuge in philosophical arguments than scientific arguments, because philosophical arguments can be deductive. Now, you can have an argument for God's existence based on science that's deductive, but science by its nature is always open to revision, isn't it? Because the more evidence we find, the conclusion might then vary.
Yeah.
What you're saying, sorry to cut you off, but it sounds like what you're saying is, no, but listen, the arguments towards the beginning of the universe are such that the idea of it being overturned is extremely unlikely. Yeah.
Okay, that's true. Yeah, and I grant your point. Yeah, science should always be open to revision, etc. But there's how much stock should we put in it? I think it's helpful to our faith to realize that, as Hubble says, a common sense interpretation of the facts would suggest that, there is this super intellect. I think that that is a support. That's not, I wouldn't want to hang my faith on that. My faith is in Jesus Christ and the resurrection, right?
But at the very least, the Christian can say, we're the ones going with the evidence here.
Yeah. It is helpful to faith to recognize that, there's a lot of evidence that supports it. And also it's helpful in evangelism. It's helpful in apologetics. It's helpful to remove false impediments. right? Because there is that teenager in your youth group or in your high school class.
And in your own mind.
Right.
That wants to just...
Exactly. Yeah. Or yourself, when you're, we talked about this before the show, when we're in situations of suffering, there's a temptation to, it's a stress in our faith. And one light of clarity that has helped me in times of personal struggle is I really, when I'm in the throes of personal suffering, I sometimes am tempted to believe that God is not good. But I never doubt that God exists, because I think the alternative is just irrational trash. Okay. And that's from working through all the arguments. I have strong confidence, that reason leads you to, one necessary being, all powerful, intelligent. I see a lot of rational vectors that lead you back to that. And that's helpful to remind myself of, that, okay, there is a God, and there are evidences external to my personal experience that point to this. It's not just, kind of wish fulfillment, et cetera. Anyway.
Let's move on to cosmic fine-tuning. What is that? What have we learned from it, and what does it suggest? Yeah,
well, we've alluded to that already. Cosmic fine-tuning is this remarkable fact that the mathematical formulas that describe the universe, as well as the numbers that are associated with them, okay, so there's a number associated with the attractive force of gravity, for example. We call that the gravitational constant. There's a number associated with how fast the universe is expanding, okay? There's a number associated with the speed of light, for example. That is the speed of light. There's numbers or values associated with the forces that are at work in the center of an atom. For example, the force that holds protons and neutrons together so they don't repel each other, and that makes possible an atom in the first place, et cetera. Those are called strong and weak nuclear forces. So there are numbers associated with all these forces. And as Stephen Hawking himself says in this book, Brief History of Time, okay, at one point in the book, he says, the remarkable fact is that all these forces seem to be fine-tuned to allow a universe that can support life. Okay, and that's quite remarkable. And Hawking admits that you could take this as evidence for a creator. And interestingly, he doesn't even bring up arguments against a creator. Just kind of offhand, you could take that as evidence for a creator. So okay, thank you for that. But many others have seen that as really quite strong evidence. And in fact, one of my favorite books, Anthony Flew, he was the world's most famous atheist before Richard Dawkins kind of took that mantle. So when I was in my adolescence, he was the notorious bad boy of...
Do you know there's a debate online, I think you can still find it, where Flew debates Dr. William Lane Craig.
Yes.
So it's wild to see his turnaround.
It is. And a very influential book that I read in my youth was a debate between Flew and Gary Habermas on the resurrection. Did the resurrection happen? And Habermas got the better of Flew in that discussion. For a number of reasons, and that was very impactful for me. I think it was like 13 or something like that. And but then Flew comes around in the last couple of years of his life, and it was largely the fine-tuning argument that Flew eventually found persuasive. So let's go back to the fine-tuning argument, though, and just give our viewers a sense of what that's all about. So, we talked about these cosmic forces and formulas and the math associated with them. So all of these cosmological constants, that's not quite the right term, but all of the values of these constants that contribute to the mathematics that describe our universe have values that, so to speak, have to be what they are, neither too much nor too little, So it's kind of a Goldilocks phenomena.
Initial conditions?
Yeah, initial conditions as well, right? That's one of the factors.
Okay.
Like initial conditions would be how much mass is in the universe and how much, how powerful is the initial force that sends everything out into expansion and so on. And then you have constants that operate thereafter, like the speed of light. Okay. So let's take the speed of light, because that's something that we can all relate to. We can at least relate to light, maybe not at speed. But if you tweak the speed of light up just a tad, and by a tad, I'm talking about something like a factor of 1 in 10 to the 37th or something like that. That's one part in a sea of parts of 10 followed by 37 zeros. So this is a very, very large number. We can't even comprehend numbers that big, and that's why you have to use scientific notation and just note the number of zeros after them. So 10 to the 37. So it's like a trillion, whatever, some unbelievably large number. So if we tweak light up by just a tad, okay, then you get a universe that's too hot and too bright for life. Everything gets sterilized, okay? You tweak it down just a tad, and you get a universe that's too cold and too dim, to support life. So we discover kind of unexpectedly, because going into it, our prior expectation would be, we could probably make light a little brighter, make it a little dimmer, and probably we get along. We could probably stand with the sun being a little dimmer than it is, and a little brighter than it is, and so on. We wouldn't think initially that would make such a big difference, but it actually does. You work out the physics implications of a slower speed of light or a faster speed of light, and you find it basically has got to be just what it is. Otherwise, you get a universe that doesn't have any life in it. Let's take another force. Let's say the force of gravity. If you tweak gravity up by just a tad, and it's very, very, very sensitive, okay, then you get a universe that expands with a Big Bang and then immediately goes back and crunches because gravity is too strong. You tweak it down just a little bit, and then everything expands before you can even get planets or stars. So the force of gravity isn't enough to pull the matter back into clumps that can become planets and stars. Without planets and stars, we don't have any life. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this repeats itself with all of these constants, and again we find, as Father Spitzer points out, and he's very good on this, and I think he's got some discussion of the fine tuning in this book. But as Father Spitzer points out, with all of these values of these different constants, like the speed of light or the force of gravity, they are all such that they can neither be more than they are or less than they are. So there's always a Goldilocks phenomena, which each of them, and for each of them, it's a very narrow band. Now, for each one of them, that's remarkable and highly unlikely. And then you take them all together, and there's about, cosmologists count up about 40 of these things. Initial mass, the strong and the weak nuclear force. I haven't even started talking about those because I haven't mastered that area of what exactly is going on with that. But I know from people who do know that they say those forces have to be exactly what they are. Et cetera, et cetera. And then you multiply all the probabilities together. And if you say, hey, the chance of light just by accident being exactly what it has to be for life, and you multiply that by the chance of gravity, et cetera, and so on, then you end up with an extremely, extremely low number. So life, is all balancing on a razor's edge, essentially, mathematically, to get. So getting a life-supporting universe is very difficult. There's virtually infinitely more ways to have a non-life-supporting universe than a life-supporting universe. And the fact that our universe has, surprise, surprise, just all the right forces, all the right constants, such that we can be here, that is surprising. That is odd. There's so many ways that things could go wrong. So, some people have used this analogy. It's like standing in front of a firing squad of 500 marksmen, and you're about to be executed, and they all fire and they all miss. And you're like, I'm still here. You know, there were so many ways that this could go wrong. And you would suspect, you know, some kind of conspiracy has to be going on here. Somebody paid them all off. This has to be organized. That is too low a probability occurrence.
That's a good response to an objection I've heard and was about to offer you. Namely, if the initial conditions and constants, etc., wasn't fine-tuned for rational life, then we wouldn't be here to ask it.
Right.
So, you know, it's kind of like if you crashed in an airplane and walked out and then someone came up with the probabilities that you're still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like, well, yeah, if I wasn't alive, I wouldn't be here to wonder at the initial conditions. So how is this really an argument for God?
Right. Yeah, and that is the executioner mental experiment is really the best answer to that. And many, you know,
it's not just one marksman,
right? Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's not somebody who's never shot a gun before.
Right. Yeah, it is, and really, it's more like 50,000 or 5 million when you look at the math. The probabilities are so low, so it's like having this immense number. You know, 5,000 experts are all training their guns on you, and they all fire and they all miss. Okay. And, you know, Dawkins concedes, you know, that there's force to the fine-tuning argument. Like I said, Flew concedes, and it eventually convinced him.
But isn't this, doesn't this argument only work if you presuppose that intelligent life is a good and the end of these initial conditions? Does that make sense? Like, why think that we're anything special? Like, maybe the world should have been conditioned for the predominance of cockroach life, where they ruled the world,
right? And
the fact that they don't is maybe an argument against the fine-tuning for their life. Like we're assuming.
Well, no. I mean, cockroaches need. Well, in the broader picture of things, cockroaches need the same set of conditions that we do. So a universe that could support cockroach life is very, 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 very similar to a universe that can support human life.
All right, so forget life. What if it should have just been...
Well, all the other options are
freezing cold, and maybe that's what it should have been, but we're presupposing that life is a good. Is that a problem?
We are. I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a deep intuition that I think that very few of us really don't feel. You know, and you know, again, I would say it seems to me like that's another way of you asking, isn't it just our kind of bias, maybe our religious bias towards human life, this tendency to think that it's in the image of God and therefore it's valuable, and then you know, we put value on it. But I think it's a common human intuition because, again, when you look at the response to the fine-tuning argument, on the atheist side, you can see that they feel the force of it.
They're not saying, no, who cares? It's not a big deal
they're not saying that, oh, yeah, whatever, you know? Yeah. And I have an article that I always share with my classes when I teach on this from Discover Magazine 2008, and we can probably get a picture of it, you know, for B-roll here. But the title of the article is on the Multiverse, and the title is something like "The Multiverse: Science's Alternative to a Creator." And you get into the body of the article, and the byline, the byline of the article is, "Our universe is finely tuned for life. This could be evidence for God or for a multiverse."
Yes.
So
we think there ought to be a cause,
right?
Yeah, it's just not God,
right? And here you have an atheistic magazine, you know, a magazine with an atheistic editorial bent of people that buy into this culture of I believe in science and science disproves God, you know, that kind of thing. Okay, confessing that this evidence does look like there's a creator or a mind behind it. You know, everybody missed. It looks like a conspiracy. I need to come up with, a really good alternative for this. And so the rest of the article is about different physicists and cosmologists who are experimenting with different kind of mathematical models of how a multiverse might operate. And it's all theoretical math. So again, look at what's happening. As Hoyle said, a common sense interpretation is there's a super intellect. Okay? But we don't like that for whatever reason. And so we take refuge in theoretical mathematics that might allow for there to be all these different worlds. There's so many problems with the multiverse, though. First of all, you would appreciate the value of Occam's razor, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It is the most egregious violation of Occam's razor probably in the history of thought. And that's not merely facetious. It might be the greatest violation because what you're doing is believing in anything and everything, right? I think an infinite multiverse is by definition anything and everything. So you're willing to believe in anything and everything rather than the common sense into just a God, just a necessary being.
It makes things worse. It's like stopping a nosebleed by cutting your head off.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you're really violating Occam's razor, the principle of parsimony in logical discourse, okay? And then you're proving too much, because if you're saying, and okay, maybe I should go back and explain why a multiverse is motivated in the first place. So the idea of the fine-tuning argument is all these parameters, the probability is so low. It seems unlikely that if there's only one universe that it would hit this spot by chance, that we would just pull the arm of the one-arm bandit once and it would all come up cherries, okay? That seems highly unlikely. So maybe if there's been lots of lever pulls, okay, maybe there's been lots of universes. Yep. And really to overcome the mathematical barrier, you really do virtually need an infinite universe, because you got, we didn't talk about the Penrose number, but Roger Penrose calculated the likelihood of the initial state of our universe such that it would allow for life. Technically what it was is the initial state of low entropy. Based on the organization of the universe at this point in its development, if you retroject that into the past, you discover that the initial state of the universe had to be extremely highly ordered. Ordered such that the chances of achieving that order by chance are 1 in 10 to 10 to, I believe it's the 123rd, but it doesn't, at that point, it doesn't make much difference. But when you're putting exponents on your exponents, okay, and the total number of fundamental particles in the universe is only somewhere in the order of like 10 to the 90th. So when you're saying the chances of hitting this highly organized universe, according to the Penrose number, is 10 to 10 to 150 or 123. We can find, the exact number can be found easily, but that's the Penrose number. So to overcome the Penrose number, to overcome the cosmic fine-tuning, you really do need like an unimaginably large number of universes. But, people are willing to believe that. But that proves too much, because if there's this unimaginably large number of universes such that it makes it likely that, one of them would have the conditions for life, then it's like, well, all possible conceivable conditions are met in one of these many universes, right? So there's theoretically a universe out there where the South won the Civil War, and there's a universe out there where Hitler won World War II, and there's a universe out there where Islam is true, and there's a universe out there where Christianity is true. And so the multiverse can be used to confirm anybody's personal beliefs. It reduces to solipsism. It's like, well, you're like, say you, Matt, are an atheist and you're attacking my Christianity. I can say, well, hey, there's a multiverse, and so all conditions are met in one of these many universes, and I just happen to believe that in one of these universes, Christianity is true, and this happens to be the universe that I'm living in. You know.
Well, to push back on that, it would seem to be that contradictions would still not exist. Even if you have an infinite number of universes, it doesn't mean that a contradiction could exist. Like there's no universe where there's a square circle, right?
Yeah.
So it might be the case that Christianity is inherently contradictory, and if it is, then it wouldn't exist on another planet.
Right, but then you'd have to demonstrate that somehow inherently contradictory.
But if it's not, then you would have to say it exists on one planet.
Then you'd have to say it's possible. And you could even say, well, there could be a universe where Christianity is true, but it doesn't look like it's true. You know?
Maybe it's this one.
Yeah, maybe it's this one or something like that. Yeah, and not that I would encourage that kind of thought, because obviously I think that's, it's a bunch of nonsense.
It's wild the degree that we'll go to avoid what just kind of seems apparent. I was listening to Joe Rogan recently, and he was interviewing a fella who unironically believes we are living in a computer simulation. And he's like, well, think about it. Like 1,000 years from now, like just think of the advancement in technology over the last 50 years. And 1,000 years from now, isn't it the case that we could create these virtual worlds where we could live and act, and therefore, like, we're willing. I don't know if it's that it's a novel idea that we're willing to latch onto it, because there was a sense in which he shared it. I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe he's right.
Yeah.
But then you bring in God, like, whatever, that old thing. We've dealt with that. No, you haven't.
Well, this is interesting. Why is it permissible to believe anything, no matter how wild, as long as it's sciencey?
Yes.
Right. And the example you just gave, I think, plays into that. Why does the idea that we're living in a computer simulation have any traction at all?
Yes.
Well, because it's sciencey.
That's true.
And so it has this,
That's exactly
this elan, because science has this prestige, right? So this is the irony when I'm talking to somebody who believes in the multiverse. It's like, why is it so bad that I believe in God? I believe in a heaven and a hell and purgatory and this reality. That's only 4 states. You're believing in an infinite number of universes. But
it's sciencey.
It's sciencey.
So I wonder if we described God as a sort of the great motherboard.
Yeah.
That was developed in 10,000 or 10 million years from now. And then we invented a time machine and went back and put it, like, people would be like, okay, I'm with you. I'm willing to accept this. I'm willing to be open to this.
Right. If we just reinterpreted Christian faith in sciencey terms, it would maybe make it more appealing.
Palatable.
Maybe that's what's behind. I think Scientology as a cult, partakes a little bit of that in terms of trying to present a religion in scientistic, a kind of terminology, and that's why it's had some traction in some places.
Interesting.
Anyway, so where are we going with this? The multiverse, right. So it's a violation of Occam's razor. It proves too much because it could end up just confirming anybody's preference. You could talking about Al Plantinga. Oh, a story about Al Plantinga. When Al Plantinga would talk about the multiverse, he would say, how well would this go over in a poker game in the Old West? He said, so the poker player is sitting there in the saloon, and he keeps pulling out 4 aces every time they play a hand. And finally somebody gets sick of it. Obviously he's cheating, so pulls out, his shooting iron. It's going to kill the guy. He's like, wait, there's a multiverse, and we just happen to live in the multiverse in which I continually am dealt 4 aces every hand, So, anyways, so that's kind of a reductio ad absurdum, right? This trajectory of thought would lead to just a self-confirming situation. But then, what I regard as even more serious issues with the multiverse is the multiverse, which proposes all these different universes, infinite number. We just happen to live in the right one. Well, you've got to have a universe generator behind that. You have some cause that's pumping out the universes. And as Spitzer points out, okay, this and others do as well. Not just Spitzer, but several cosmologists point this out, that that universe generator that you've got would have to itself be finely tuned. Okay, because it is very possible that you could have a universe generator that just, for example, continually spits out the same universe, a universe with the same parameters, the same dead, dark, empty universe keeps pumping out. In fact, that's kind of what you would expect, without having any previous knowledge. If you're just going to set up a universe generator, it's going to pump out the same universe every time. You would have to have a universe generator which would systematically search through all the cosmic parameters and constants, and continually be producing universes with different values for these, and kind of search that design space until it hit, as it were, the right one that could support life. And then you'd have to ask the question, why is it the case that we have not only a universe generator, but one that is systematically searching cosmic design space to hit exactly the right spot? That would look contrived,
right?
And then there would be other factors, like your universe generator would have to spit them out at the right intervals and at the right places in multiverse space, such that they wouldn't negatively interact with one another and just like destroy one another, like collide and smash and like kill everything. So you have to have them, spit out at regular intervals in the right places, so as it were, the bubbles don't mutually destroy one another, and so on, and many other factors, and Spitzer goes into that. So you end up doing what we call kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
Right. You kick it to a different level. So instead of having to argue about why this universe is fine-tuned, you move the question to, why is the universe generator that's generated this multiverse that we're in, how or why is it that's finely tuned?
Why not just say it just, like, I guess, are there people who say fine-tuning is not evidence for the existence of a fine-tuner who don't appeal to a multiverse? And if so, what do they say? I would imagine all they could say is, it just is this way, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, a brute fact. Yeah, and I think there are people that do that. It's just, this is a brute fact. Not many people find that satisfying, okay? And that's why I have all my students read the Discover article, because what it points out to, Discover magazine, which I used to subscribe to, and I would like to subscribe to it again. It's a great magazine. I love it. Growing up, I just waited with bated breath for it to arrive every month, and I just read all the articles with zeal and found them so interesting. But anyway. But Discover magazine represents a popular community within the United States of people who like science and are into science and so on. And the fact that they have to write an article that addresses the question of fine-tuning and provides an alternative. And it's interesting the way they phrase it, science is alternative. Like, why does science need an alternative to God? That's a question that I would like to ask. Why is science allergic to God? What is the philosophical objection? And a lot of these writers, in Hawking's and in others as well, you wonder, like, they don't. I guess Dawkins maybe explicitly talks about the reasons why he doesn't like the idea of God, but most other scientists don't actually present an argument against God. They just take it as a given.
I really think it's a matter of pride.
Yeah.
Because science, at least how we understand it today, not in Aristotle's sense or Aquinas' sense, has to do with what we can observe, what we can control in a way.
Right.
It has nothing to say whatever about what can't be observed.
Right.
And then so you'll see people saying things like, you ought not to accept something as true unless it can be shown true by science, which of course is the fallacy of scientism. That's a proposition that cannot be validated by science. It's self-referentially incoherent.
Right.
And I wonder if there's part of us that hates the idea that there is something we cannot observe, cannot measure, cannot determine as true for ourselves, using the tool that we're so proud of, or something like that.
That's almost exactly the argument that Jastrow makes in chapter 6 of God and the Astronomers. All the more powerful because, again, he wasn't a religious person. But he calls that chapter the religion of science. And he says outright, scientists are very uncomfortable with something that they can't explore, can't explain. Yeah. And when you say can't explain, what he means by that is can't explain in terms of matter and energy. It can't explain.
I'm going to use a very crass analogy. It might be why a man prefers a prostitute to his wife, or pornography to a loving relationship. One I can control, one I can't. Like to have another's heart, to have another's affection, is not within my control, and it's frustrating. I know that, again, here I am with my bad analogies, Dr. Bergsma, but that seems to me something like that, where, like you see this in relationships where people come to resent men or to resent women, and I think it, not always, but sometimes might be an issue of pride.
I think you've hit on something very deep there, and actually I point this out when teaching on the wisdom literature of Scripture. The wisdom literature consistently across several biblical books portrays the way of wisdom as a spousal relationship with Lady Wisdom. And Lady Wisdom is not only presented as an attractive woman, but specifically as a wife. What's the difference between a wife and a woman? Well, a wife is a woman with whom you are in a covenant relationship. Right? And so the message of Proverbs, for example, which has that beautiful, Song of the Valiant Woman in Proverbs 31, that, people don't understand often how significant that final poem is. But when you look at the Hebrew poetry there, that woman in Proverbs 31 is actually being presented as the embodiment of Lady Wisdom, as God's wisdom, okay? And she's the ideal wife, and so what's the appropriate response? Well, you're supposed to look for her and marry her, okay? Enter into a covenantal relationship with her. Ultimately, that's pointing forward to God's wisdom, who is Christ, or we can understand as the Holy Spirit, with whom also we want to enter into a covenantal relationship with, right? But as you point out, when you're in a covenantal relationship with a person, you can't control that person. It's a dynamic and loving relationship. Now, what I find absolutely mind-blowing is that in the beginning of the Republic, Plato uses a similar analogy. He describes the true philosopher as a spouse of wisdom, but he says that either himself or through his, it would be through one of the characters in his dialogue, right? Because the Republic is a dialogue. But, through his characters, Plato says that in his own day, philosophy has fallen on hard times because those who ought to have married wisdom have not, and they've left her to be abused by basically boyfriends who sneak in and impregnate her and are not faithful and raise bastard children, So Plato, much like the biblical wisdom tradition, contrasts the path of true wisdom as spousal and covenantal, entering into dynamic relationship where you don't seek to control the other, versus folly as a relationship with truth that seeks to dominate or control, and when you can't, you abandon. And I find that profound. And when I look at these different thinkers represented by these different books before me, I can think of some of the characters here treat truth like a girlfriend, or even worse, as a prostitute, that they can hire for a time while they enjoy her, but when truth starts to make demands, they leave her on the curb.
Ooh. Thank you for salvaging my bad analogy. That was excellent. Yeah, that's really good. Oh, say that again. That was excellent. So I like that a lot, because I pursue the path of truth.
Right.
It's okay so long as it doesn't make demands upon me. And then it does. I don't like that. Kick her out.
Right.
Find another.
Yeah, and I would, say that Dawkins does that, for example. Truth is acceptable as long as it's supporting his Darwinian paradigm. But when, say, the fossil record doesn't agree, why, we're going to sweep that under the rug. We're not going to talk about that, or we're going to evade that using reasons that really I think Dawkins himself knows aren't good ones. Okay. So the question is, are we going to follow truth where it leads? And to do that, you need to be in that covenantal relationship with truth. And I think that's really what the Christian faith is calling us to do, that say ultimately that truth has become incarnate, lived among us as a person, our Lord Jesus Christ, and he is our spiritual spouse, and we follow him. But the message of John chapter 1 is Christ, the truth incarnate in his historical ministry, is mysteriously the same as the truth which is at the bottom of the physical universe, the logos through which God created. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. There is nothing that was created apart from him, etc. So these are the two books of Revelation, nature and Scripture. They ultimately lead us to the same truth.
I want to tell you about a course that I have created for men to overcome pornography. It is called strive21.com/Matt. You go there right now, or if you text STRIVE to 66866, we'll send you the link. It's 100% free, and it's a course I've created to help men, to give them the tools to overcome pornography. Usually men know that porn is wrong. They don't need me or you to convince them that it's wrong. What they need is a battle plan to get out. And so I've distilled all that I've learned over the last 15 or so years as I've been talking and writing on this topic into this one course. Think of it as if you and I could have a coffee over the next 21 days and I would kind of guide you along this journey. That's basically what this is. It's incredibly well produced. We had a whole camera crew come and film this. And I think it'll be a real help to you. And it's also not an isolated course that you go through on your own, because literally tens of thousands of men have now gone through this course. And as you go through the different videos, there's comments from men all around the world encouraging each other, offering to be each other's accountability partners and things like that. Strive21, that's strive21.com/Matt, or as I say, text STRIVE to 66866 to get started today. You won't regret it. Let's talk about the origin of life, if that's okay.
Yeah,
we move on from fine-tuning?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to begin with maybe a much more difficult, well, maybe not a difficult question. What is life? I don't even know if I know what that is. I sometimes wonder why we're so quick to assume that fire isn't alive. It has a beginning, it consumes, and as it consumes, it grows, and it can reproduce, it can die. What is life?
Yeah. Well, you can...
you didn't expect me to ask that question. So
right, I didn't expect you to, but it's a good question. And you can look up definitions that are given of it, in the standard textbooks. And I'm just doing this on the fly, so I'm trying
While you do it on the fly, I'm going to ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. So some usual features that are included in the definition of life is, something that has homeostasis, which is a stable chemical equilibrium within itself. Okay, that's necessary for life. So if you look at any cell, you don't have runaway reactions going on inside of it. It's kind of chemically stable there, and that's homeostasis. Another characteristic of life is metabolism, which means we're burning fuel to get energy. Another characteristic of life is responsiveness to the environment. So I move towards light or I move away from light, depending on whether it's helpful for me, you mentioned the ability to reproduce. So what do you got up there? Read what ChatGPT.
Tell me what you think of it. Life is the existence and experience of living beings encompassing their physical, emotional, intellectual, and social activities. It involves growth, reproduction, adaptation, and interaction with the environment. Good job. Life is often characterized by the pursuit of meaning, that's human, intelligent life, isn't it? Meaning, fulfillment, and connections with others, as well as inevitable challenges. And
Yeah. So immediately,
I like yours better than ChatGPT.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of was self-referential there, or begging the question, because it said life is something about living beings, right? And
yeah, you're right. I didn't catch that. Life is the existence and experience of living beings.
Well,
yeah. But what's that?
Yeah, right. That's begging the question right there.
What is a living being? A living being or organism is an entity that exhibits the characteristics of life. These characteristics typically include, here we go, organization. Okay. So composed of one or more cells. I don't know what a cell is, which are the basic units of life. Okay, thank you, ChatGPT. Now I do. Metabolism, the ability to convert energy and matter, etc. Growth, it's a reproduction, response to stimuli.
Right.
Interesting. The ability to perceive and react to environmental changes.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a bunch of exceptions that we would still say this is life, and yet it doesn't fit into this criteria. But all right.
Right.
The point is,
response to stimuli describes my children at various times. They don't respond.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think that they've stopped living because they're not responding.
But the point is just that I think that the topic of what is, because I mean, actually, one of the questions in the Summa is God alive?
Right. It's a good question. It's kind of an ineffable question. I don't think that we can nail it down. That doesn't mean that we can't say anything about it.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to say metabolism. Well, when we're talking about biological life or physical life, I think it is helpful to say growth, reproduction, metabolism, response. I think those things are helpful. But you're right. There are some exceptions. Probably there are borderline cases. With viruses as an example, there's a debate: are viruses really alive? I don't consider them to be alive, but it depends on how you define life. But that's admittedly that's another question. Reminds me of, who was it? There's a great jazz artist who was once asked, what is jazz? And his response was, if you don't know, I can't tell you. Something like that.
Or Potter Stewart, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, when asked to give a definition of pornography, says, well, I know it when I see it.
I know it when I see it, yeah, exactly. So, and that's admittedly true. On the origin of life, I think this is a good book. Stephen Meyer, you said you might want to get him on the show sometime.
Yeah,
I think
Stephen, if
awesome.
You're watching.
Awesome, if we could. Yeah, Signature in the Cell is his discussion about the mystery of the origin of life and many other things. So let's talk about origin of life. So it is hard to define life, but we do have a sense of what we mean when we say a living thing. That's not a vacuous statement.
Right.
And then the question is, where do living things come from? How they arise? And this is a big conundrum, because essentially when we recreate the conditions of the early earth under which presumably life arose, and that we know that life appeared, okay? But when we recreate those initial conditions, they do not conduce to the chemistry that is necessary for a living thing to come into existence.
Okay.
So, we can recreate the atmosphere of the early Earth. We can recreate what we think the early oceans might be. We can do that in a laboratory and create this artificial environment. And then we just leave it and watch it. And what happens? A whole lot of nothing. Okay. And so well, nothing's happening. So let's create some excitement. So let's stimulate lightning, right? Let's create some lightning zaps. And lightning also creates a whole lot of nothing. Now, folks might say, well, I thought we could get amino acids from lightning. Well, okay, this goes back to a famous experiment called the Stanley, the Urey-Miller experiment. Miller and Urey created what they believed to be the atmosphere and the conditions of the early Earth, and then they put electrical pulses through it to stimulate simulate lightning, and they got a bunch of amino acids. Not all the amino acids that we need, but they got a bunch of them, and that was really cool. And that is basically the last advance that we've had in origin of life research. To this day, when we simulate the conditions of the early Earth and maybe shoot simulated lightning through it or whatever, we can't get beyond amino acids. Like, now I probably should explain what amino acids are. Okay, so amino acids, there's roughly 20 of them, and they are the bricks that make up proteins. So proteins are like nanomachines, or sometimes the parts that make up nanomachines in our cells. And if you look at a cell under, electron microscope, it's really amazing what's going on down there. And there are simulations of this or visualizations of this. Drew Barry is a famous visualizer. And maybe we can put up for our viewers some of his animations of what's going on inside a cell. But it's really amazing when you see that. And Drew Barry has gone around and done like TED Talks and so on, and show his illustrations of what's actually going on inside of a cell. And his little videos produce gasps and just awe in audiences, because we tend to think of a cell as, it's just a moving blob of jello or something that's going on, like that's not very sophisticated. But those that actually work in this area say that an individual cell is as complicated as, say, New York City. So when you go down and you get down to the molecular level, you've got all these transport mechanisms going on, like trucks moving things around within a city, and you've got these complicated information transfers happening, and energy is coming in and energy is being produced, or as it should say, fuel is coming in, energy is being produced, and chemicals are coming in and chemicals are being expelled, all to keep that homeostasis, that equilibrium that a living thing needs, so that it stays alive. So all of this is absolutely amazing. So how close can we get to that? How close can we get to creating a cell? Well, okay, we can recreate the conditions of the early Earth, and when we do that, at most all we get is amino acids. What are amino acids? If you think of a protein as like a making a little robot with Legos, with Lego bricks, then the amino acids might be analogous to the individual Lego bricks. So a little part with two bumps on the top, or something like that. Okay. So you take a bunch of, there's like roughly 20 different kinds of amino acids, and you put them together, and you can make a protein which has a function, and it gets its function from its three-dimensional shape, how it moves around. Maybe it can cut things, maybe it can join things, and it does that in the cell to support life. Okay, so really amazing. But we can't get to the proteins because the proteins require information. Okay, the way proteins are actually made in the cell is that the cell itself pieces amino acids together one at a time, the way a child or you would piece bricks of Legos together one at a time to make a machine. So they piece them together, the amino acids together in a very long string, and then once the string is ready, there's other organs in the cell that take the string and fold that string up into a kind of like a biological origami. And when it comes out, it's in a three-dimensional shape that can cut or splice or attach or transport things or do any number of different things for the cell. So that's all very amazing, but organelles that construct a protein within the cell have to do that from a script that's provided by the DNA in the cell. And the DNA contains the script for what amino acids to attach to each other in a chain in order to get a protein of whatever function. So just like you get the box of Legos and you pull it out and it's got the instruction thing like, oh, I got to attach this, I got to attach that, and you follow along, and then you get, your little shark or your airplane or whatever it is that you were building. And so that requires information. What can we get from the conditions of the early Earth? Well, we can get some Lego bricks and nothing beyond that. Okay, we can't get carbohydrates, which are sugars, which are burned for fuel. We can't get lipids, which are fats that create the the cell wall that protect it from the exterior environment. We can't get ribonucleic acid or any nucleic acids either because, well, for a number of different reasons. They're too complicated to be formed under ambient conditions, but also there's a water problem. Proteins and nucleic acids are linked together by a process that's called dehydration synthesis. Okay, they're joined by removing a water molecule. We imagine that the early Earth was very watery. So this is not going to take place in water, because if you submerge proteins and DNA and RNA and so on in water, unprotected by a cell wall and unmanaged, just in the ambient environment in the ocean, they're going to break down from a process called hydrolysis, which means degradation by water or breaking apart by water. So this creates in origin of life research what's called the water problem, which is kind of a catch-22, which is if you're trying to get a living thing, all living things need a lot of water in order to live. But unfortunately, the molecules that you need to build a living cell, typically break down in water. So that means that the usual scenario that's presented to high school biology students and to people who visit a museum of natural history, we all know this, right? You go to the Museum of Natural History, you walk into their film room or their amphitheater, and they're going to show you a film about life, the mystery of life. And it always begins like, on the early Earth, there was a pool of organic soup. Pool of organic molecules. They never explain where do these organic molecules come from. That's a whole problem in itself. But then something like there was a strike of lightning or something like this, or they don't even say it. By the narrator doesn't even say it, but you see lightning zap the pool, and then maybe they animate some kind of single-celled creature or an amoeba, kind of emerge from the pool, and oftentimes they try to have the narrator not say a whole lot because they know that this is a false scenario. They know the scientific problems with this. And really, that whole scenario, and that really comes from a letter that Charles Darwin wrote to a friend. And in Darwin's entire Origin of Species, he never deals with the origin of life. He didn't write a book called The Origin of Life. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species. He just presumes life from the beginning. He never tackled how life could arise from the beginning. But in a letter to a friend, he said, maybe on the early Earth, there could be a pool of organic molecules and blah, 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 like that. And we've taken that and run with it. But let me explain why that's pseudoscience, okay? Why these films that play in so many museums around our country, and that scenario that's presented in images in biology textbooks, that is pseudoscientific, okay? Folks that work on origin of life know that you're not going to get life forming in a pool of water. And that's because of the water problem, because water is going to break down. Okay, so contemporary scenarios, we could talk about them in a minute, but they don't include having it in a pool of water. All right. Fred Hoyle said there was no pool of organic soup, either on this planet or any other. He had done a lot of research on this and what we call astrobiology. But anyway, so that's not going to happen. The molecules that you need are going to break apart. They're not going to aggregate. They're not going to form in a pool on the early Earth. Secondly, if you strike them with lightning, since when does lightning bring things to life?
I'm thinking of The Flash. It's interesting. A lot of our superheroes have these origin stories where chemicals are spilled, supernatural gifts are imposed. And I wonder if this idea kind of comes from this pseudoscientific idea.
Well, it's all like our superheroes are exposed to radiation. That kills you, okay? Radiation makes you sick. It doesn't give you superpowers, or they're exposed to toxins. Well, toxins, that's why it kills you, So we have it's all magical thinking is behind our sci-fi. And
but to your question, the lightning.
Lightning is hotter than the surface of the sun. Lightning is, I don't have the exact figures, but the amps and the volts in lightning are, crazy large, and you just unleash all of that electricity into a pool. It's going to kill anything. It's going to sterilize the pool. It's not going to bring a living organism into existence. And so why are we showing this to our children? A scenario that we know to be false. Okay, the molecules aren't going to form in water, and if you zap them with huge amounts of electricity, that you're going to sterilize them or blow them apart, and yet this is what's presented. So, on this whole, I'm not an expert in the, in researching origin of life, but I can understand the works of those who are, and I'd really recommend James Tour, James M. Tour. He's a synthetic chemist at Rice University. He's got his own YouTube channel and hours and hours and hours of class instruction, essentially, on origin of life, where he exposes this. But he points out the fact that there is no science behind this pool of organic soup model, and that, in fact, we can't get the four classes of biomolecules that we need for life. We can't get them in a recreated environment of the early Earth. We can't even get them in contrived environments in a lab. Okay, so what are those? Carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. Okay, those are the four classes of compounds that you need for a living cell. And we can't make any of them in a lab using prebiotic ingredients alone, okay? Now you might say, oh, we use proteins or nucleic acids all the time in a lab. Yes, and we're always deriving them from things that are already alive. If we limit ourselves to the chemistry that's available on the early Earth, even with all our laboratory apparatus, we can't produce usable glucose, for example. We can't produce a whole string of proteins. Sometimes we can, do, high energy experiments where we produce a whole mass of compounds, and buried in there is some carbohydrates, or buried in there is something else useful, but not in a form that we could ever use or do further chemistry with it. Okay, so we're really at a standstill. And one of the things about origin of life research I want to emphasize, Matt, is that the question of the origin of life is not the question of, can we as human beings recreate a cell? Can we ever figure out how to make some kind of synthetic life ourselves? We're at a standstill at that, even that point. But really, origin of life is not about us making a cell. It's about how a cell just happened by chance on the early earth. How do the ambient conditions of the early Earth just give rise? So we know we can recreate the conditions of the early Earth, and we know what happens. Nothing. Okay? A whole lot of nothing. All right. So well, then how did it get there? Well, this is like the question of the Big Bang, Okay. Life living things do not naturally aggregate under ambient conditions, okay, under natural conditions, So the laws of physics and chemistry on the early Earth alone will not pull the molecules together and do this. We know, we've tried, we know they don't. If you want to, if our viewers want a good expert to follow in this area, Dr. Brian J. Miller. He contributed a chapter or two to this book, which I also want to advertise, which is God's Grandeur, The Catholic Case for Intelligent Design. I've got a chapter on Scripture in this volume. Dr. Miller has a couple of chapters in there as well. He's an expert on thermodynamics, and he can explain why thermodynamic law prevents the spontaneous formation of the very complicated molecules that you need for a living thing. Under undirected conditions, and make it difficult even under directed conditions. So getting back to this, what do we know about life? We know that life arose. We know that it can't happen by natural means. We know that laws of physics and chemistry alone won't do it. We know that life requires a lot of intelligence. This is the argument that Meyer makes in this book. We need those instructions. We need those Lego instructions. And then we need something also to follow the instructions. And this is like a terribly intractable chicken and egg kind of catch-22 problem. You know, we need the instructions, and we need something that can follow the instructions, and we need a whole lot else. We need something to protect the whole process from water, but we do need water, okay, but only in very controlled amounts. I never knew this, but our cells are very good at handling water, and they handle water carefully, because unrestricted water in this cell can do bad things. So it's got to be carefully controlled. And so every living cell, you know, has to manage the water intake and outgo very, very carefully. So anyway, so what is this suggesting? Well, natural processes can't do it. Okay. This is looking like we need intervention from outside. We need some kind of force, and that force needs to be intelligent. And it's a force that we're not aware of, and it's not accounted for by, you know, the matter and energy and the laws of nature that we can see. So again, it's looking like the big man.
All right.
The big
All right.
guy.
Very good. Let's turn to evolution, the fossil record. First, I'd want to say if evolution is true, macroevolution.
You have no pushback on the whole origin of life thing?
I don't understand it to push back on it.
Don't understand it?
Yeah.
What didn't you understand?
Well, I'm being a little hyperbolic maybe, but yeah, I understood very little of that. I mean, it seems to me that again, maybe it's because I've confused myself by trying to understand what life is, but if I take a sort of basic layman's understanding of what we mean by life, and then I think of a lifeless world, yeah, it seems bizarre to me how life could originate from non-life.
Right.
That seems like, how does
kind of
life
prove
originate
that doesn't
from
happen.
darkness?
I mean, that's kind of like the whole principle of sterilization and pasteurization, and it seems like we've put to rest the whole idea that life can come from non-life a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, other than these ideas of soup and lightning hitting it and things like this, I mean, what is the basic response to people like Maya from the atheist perspective? Is it that
the response is silence? I mean, this is really interesting.
Really?
Over the past 2 years, you're unaware of this, probably, but for the past 2 years, there's been a huge debate raging on the internet and on YouTube between James Tour and a blogger named Professor Dave.
Yes, man, he is a condescending fella.
Yeah. And Tour points out that we're getting nowhere with origin of life research because this is just like impossible. The chemistry is impossible, and has called out by name like the 10 top origin of life researchers in the world and challenged them on YouTube to contradict him. And it's been crickets. It's got no response at all.
What is Professor Dave, who badly embarrassed himself, by the way, when he tried to respond to Matt Walsh's What is a Woman? It was hopeless. So bad that he had to shut off the comments because he got so much blowback from it.
Yeah.
But okay, but what is Professor Dave's sort of response?
Professor Dave has done a variety of things, gone ad hominem, simply quoted. There's a lot of studies. I think a lot of what Professor Dave has done is quoted the titles and the conclusions of a whole lot of research that goes on in Origin of Life, where both the titles and the conclusions are way inflated in order to get funding. But then what James Tour does is goes and says, okay, yeah, they claim to have done whatever. Let's actually look at it. Mm-hmm. And then Tour goes in with his trained, synthetic chemist mind. He says, this chemistry is not replicating the early Earth. What they're doing is buying chemicals from a chemical provider and then doing highly contrived experiments in the lab under conditions that you could not achieve on the early Earth, conditions of sterility, conditions of purity, etc., that you're not going to have when you just got like just the Earth, right? And then what they're doing is maybe doing one chemical reaction in a string of 10,000 chemical reactions that would be necessary to move from non-life to life. Mm-hmm. And so they make this one little step under contrived conditions using chemicals bought in a lab, and then they exaggerate the success of the results and say, we're very close to coming up with, the solution to the origin of life, because they need more funding, right? And who's going to fund a study that, that is just doing what I just described.
Yeah.
If you describe, so that's what Tour has been demonstrating, and he's just been getting silence from the other side, and that tells me something as a external observer. Like I can follow the arguments, I can't reproduce the arguments and reproduce all of Tour's chemistry.
Yeah.
But I can follow what he's saying, and the fact that the other side isn't coming back and saying, oh, yes, we can, and here's a simple reaction, you can reproduce this reaction in your lab, that tells me that they don't have a response to Tour. And Dave is, Professor Dave is, just a kind of an internet troll kind of figure, making personal attacks and not himself, being able to manage the chemistry. So anyway, that's what's been going on. So that's been going on for the past 2 years. And, people that want to go deeper into this, like just, I've spent about 40 hours watching Tour's explanations of abiogenesis, and following his explanations of the chemistry. And so if people want to do that, I think they're going to find he's the real deal, and he's an honest man.
Yeah, I haven't looked into him, so I couldn't speak to that, but I'll take your word for it. It seems to me then that, given what we've looked at, Big Bang theory, cosmic fine-tuning, origin of life, I'm sure there are, I don't want to eliminate the possibility of there being like intelligent atheists who have goodwill, because of course they exist, trying to find solutions to this. But it seems like the easiest way to respond to these as an atheist would be to say, we just don't know enough yet.
Right.
Do you see? So like Big Bang theories, like we don't know enough yet. And that might mean we were wrong about the origin of the universe and it is eternal. It might mean that there is a multiverse, or even if there is, maybe there's something prior to the Big Bang and we just don't know that yet. Cosmic fine-tuning, something similar. We could appeal to the multiverse again there. Origin of life, give us time. This is something I keep hearing Dawkins say, give us time. We don't know.
We've had a lot of time.
Yeah, well, we need more. But that just seems, sure, that there's some truth to that, right? Like we know a lot more about the universe today than we used to.
But the more that we know,
that's what I'm saying. That's what I was about.
It's actually pushing us toward God, not away.
That's what I was about to get to. Because the atheist will accuse the Christian of God of the gaps arguments, meaning we put God in the gaps where we don't know. But what you're saying is the opposite is true. The more we're learning, we don't believe in God. We don't have more confidence in the existence of God based on science because of what we don't know. We have more confidence in the existence of God through science because of what we're discovering.
What we do know, right. Yeah. So a great example is in Darwin's own day, under the primitive microscope that they had, primitive by our standards, okay, you look at a single-celled creature in 1850 whatever, okay, and what you see is it looks like a blob of Jell-O on under your microscope, right?
Yeah.
So it's not hard to believe that kind of an animate blob of Jell-O could arise from lightning striking a pool of organic soup or whatever. Mm-hmm. But now that we know, and now that we understand the cell to the point that we have these Drew Berry animations, and we can enter the cell and we see all the like mind-blowing DNA replication that's going on at speeds that are unimaginable, using geared mechanisms that are like whirring away and so on. Now that we understand all that, the idea that, that arose from a lightning strike, like that's absurd. Okay. So our increase in knowledge, Darwin had the gap. It was a kind of an atheism of the gaps. Like he didn't know what was going on in the cell, and it was easy to impute it to chance. Now that we know what's going on in the cell, it's absurd to impute it all to chance. It all has the marks of design. It has the marks of purpose. It has the marks of intentionality. This thing wants to live. This thing wants to live, and it wants to reproduce. And yet the thing itself does not appear to be conscious and does not appear to have these strong desires. And the thing itself doesn't appear to have the intelligence to design itself. And so that intelligence, purpose, intentionality that is evident in this single-celled creature seems to be coming from the outside. It seems to be coming from elsewhere. And this is the fifth way. This is the way of design. And then we say that's that being that is placing the design and the purpose there is what we commonly call God.
I want to do a shout out for my own book here. This is a book
Absolutely.
called Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the Five Ways of Thomas Aquinas. Basically, I wrote it as Lucy, the theist, and AJ meet in a coffee shop. He's wearing a shirt that says, "I'm an atheist, debate me." They get into a conversation. They look at the arguments Aquinas gives for atheism, and then they look at the five ways. And I think it's a very charming back and forth. I submitted it to the publisher, and he said, "Great, let's go ahead and print it." And I said, "Wait, I don't know what I'm talking about. There's a great chance that I've not understood Aquinas at all." I said, "Let's run this by a Thomist." So they sent it to Dr. Robert Delfino, who very graciously took the time to review this book. He made some suggestions. He said, "This is good, but you got this wrong." "Oh, thank you very much." And then he kept adding suggestions, and I said, "Why don't you co-write this with me?" And so he did. So I'd highly recommend people get this book, Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the Five Ways of Thomas Aquinas, because I think it's really accessible, and we got very nice endorsements from Dr. Peter Kraft and Dr. Ed Fazer. You can get it on Amazon. How is that for a advert?
That's great. That's an awesome ad.
Thank you.
I totally echo that.
Now, I want to talk about evolution here because you is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
You talked about life having design, purpose, and intentionality. Is that what you,
right, yeah.
you said? But though it would seem like, well, how is that the case? Or why should that be so, I don't know, overwhelmingly convincing to us as an argument for God's existence when, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm nowhere near being competent in this area, but isn't the idea of macroevolution that there is no design, there is no purpose, there is no intentionality?
Right. Yeah.
So even if what we see today appears to have those things, didn't it originate from chaos and this chaotic?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's illustrated by the title of Dawkins' famous book, "The Blind Watchmaker: Why the Evidence of Evolution Reveals a Universe Without Design."
Yeah.
That's so untrue. And when I read this book now, having had some experience and having read things like Darwin's Doubt or, Meyer's Signature in the Cell and so on, you realize that Dawkins is kind of running from the evidence. And he admits at the beginning of this book that biology is the study of things that look designed.
Okay.
And I think I say, thank you, Richard, for admitting that everything does look designed, because that gets back to, Hoyle's statement, a common sense interpretation of the facts. I think that's the same. When Dawkins says it looks designed, he's saying a common sense interpretation would be it's designed, And so throughout all these different discussions of these different areas, whether it's, Big Bang, or fine tuning, or biological development, etc. In all these cases, the common sense reaction to the data is simply, wow, this looks designed, looks like there's a designer, right? Looks like it's fine tuned. The universe seems to be fine tuned for life by a fine tuner. Okay. Life has all these qualities, looks like it's from a creator, and so on. So the question is, can evolution provide an alternative to a designer? And that, of course, was what Darwin was attempting to do. Now, I started with these other questions, like the Big Bang, because in those cases, Darwin's evolution doesn't help at all. Okay, with the initial conditions of the Big Bang, you don't have life yet. Okay, with fine tuning, evolution doesn't help at all, because evolution is a biological phenomena.
Yep.
With origin of life, evolution doesn't help at all.
Right.
Because you can't begin to evolve until you have reproduction going on. And then natural selection, after you have reproduction happening, natural selection presumably can work on mutations to, as it were, select the ones that are more fit. And then you can go from there.
Right. So even if evolution did occur, it's not an argument against the origin of the universe, fine-tuning and
or the origin of life. Yeah, it only works once you have life up and running.
Man, have you checked out Exodus 90 lately? If you've heard of Exodus 90 before, you're probably thinking of cold showers and Lent. But the Exodus 90 app offers so much more. It's a daily companion to help you grow closer to God and to become the man you want to be. This summer, I'm following along with the app's daily scriptures, reflections, and prayers. It's awesome. On the app, you can join the Enthronement to the Sacred Heart, the Exodus 90 Summer Book Club, and St. Michael's Lent, which starts August 15th and leads up to the Feast of St. Michael the Archangel on September 29th. St. Michael's Lent is an ancient tradition of prayer and fasting popularized by St. Francis in the Middle Ages that's been lost in our time. Let's bring it back. Join the men of Exodus 90 and Father Carlos Martins, Catholic priest, exorcist, and host of the Exorcist Files, who will serve as our spiritual guide for St. Michael's Lent this year on the Exodus 90 app. We will awaken to invisible realities and enter into the spiritual battle that rages around us all the time. Go to exodus90.com/Matt for a 14-day free trial to the Exodus 90 app and to learn more about St. Michael's Lent. That's exodus90.com/Matt to join us for St. Michael's Lent starting August 15. All right, good to be back with you.
Yes.
We needed that break. We had our espressos.
We do.
Big espresso fan. You know,
how do you say espresso in Australian?
Bladunchkimanatila. You say espresso. So I was just in Italy.
Okay.
All over Europe. But my
of course
goodness,
you're always all over Europe.
Yeah,
just a world traveler.
Well, this past 5 months, but it was in Italy. Even when you go to the gas station in the afternoon, there's a espresso bar and like 10, 15 people all there shooting their espressos. Yeah,
that would be so wild.
It's really cool.
I would never sleep.
Yeah, but it's funny how picky people are in Italy.
Yeah.
This happened to me. I said, "Yes, hi. Can I have a cappuccino?" No, it's the afternoon. Right, but I mean, can I pay you? No. All right, I'll have an espresso. Right, that happens in Italy. If you're from Italy, tell me I'm not lying. Here's another thing that happened. I like my coffee strong.
Okay.
So if I get a cappuccino or a flat white, these words mean different things in different countries, I learned. But if I get a flat white and I want an extra shot of espresso, so this is what happened. Could I have a flat white with an extra shot of espresso? No. I'll pay extra. No, this is not possible. Okay. I really love Italians.
It's like coffee religion. Well, it's like, no, that's against the dogma.
I love how, I don't think they're rude. I think they're just extraordinarily direct.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
This is stupid. No. Get out of the way.
This is not done. Right.
So my wife works really well in Italy because she's like that naturally.
Okay.
So she was trying to get the kids into a bathroom by the Vatican and the guard said no. And my wife and him got into a yelling match. I wasn't there. Or else I would have yelled back.
One of the armed guys in the colorful uniforms?
No, it wasn't a colorful uniform, but anyway, she won.
Oh.
And then when she came out, like he was all friendly to her and she was friendly to him. This is how cholerics work. Cholerics aren't put off by like strong confrontation.
Yeah. I wish I was like that.
I wish I was more like that.
I'm a melancholic. What are you?
Melancholic choleric.
Oh, okay. Are you?
What are you? Melancholic?
Yeah, I'm melancholic cleric too.
Yeah.
So
it's brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm depressive until you push me, and then
and then I'll push back.
Yeah, something I'm not going to say on air.
All right. Well, that was a nice little break there. So let's do this. Just little minor light topics we're discussing today.
Light topics that we're talking about.
I think one thing you'll find among atheists when you push them on things that we've discussed today, Big Bang, cosmic fine-tuning, origin of life or whatever else. I mean, look, to be fair, just like the Christian says, well, it's a mystery. Like we actually don't know, and that's okay. But the atheist often retreats, I would say, in the face of modern scientific findings. I've heard this a lot from Dawkins. And again, I don't want to put him up as the poster boy. I know there are much more intelligent atheists and more articulate and, whatever. Who's the Australian fella, the Australian atheist that everyone says he's the best?
I don't know.
Gary, do you mind looking him up Thursday? Australian atheist. This is the guy I asked William Lane Craig. No, not Dennett. He's first of all, not with us anymore. We pray for the repose of his soul. And I'm pretty sure he was American.
Yeah, Dennett was American.
Gosh, what is his name? I asked Dr. William Lane Craig, like, who is the smartest atheist? Who would be an atheist you wouldn't love to debate? And he said, this guy.
Huh.
So point is, I know there are really bright atheists, but it seems to me that I often hear people giving a similar response whenever you talk about these modern findings is, look, we don't know enough yet. Give us time, is something I hear Dawkins say. We will figure these things out. You, as the Christian, what you're doing is you're short-circuiting the scientific endeavor by trying to insert God too soon.
Okay.
You know, you're actually like getting in the way of this beautiful human endeavor that we call science.
Yeah.
And if we just we will figure these things out. You don't need to posit a God.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you say
well, first of all,
Graham Oppie. Thank you very much. Graham Oppie.
Yeah. Good. So,
Graham Oppie, if you're watching, I want you to debate Trent Horn or Jimmy Aiken on my podcast. We would love to have another Aussie on the show. Sorry.
Okay. So, yeah, like I said, one response that I would have to say to that is, as time has progressed, the evidence for theism has strengthened rather than diminished. So if you're saying, give us more time, and in one sense I'm saying, yeah, I'll give you more time because it's just getting better for my side, okay, of the argument. Things are just, so, you know, the sudden appearance, the phenomena of sudden appearance in the fossil record has only gotten sharper since Darwin's day. The argument against the possibility of undirected origin of life has only gotten stronger. But the other thing I would say about that is I agree with you. That's a response that I often see in the literature is, we'll get this figured out. We're working on the math. You know, Hawkins was working on the math. Penrose is working on math to try to have an eternal universe, you know, and like, you know, I'll get it someday, et cetera. But that's a phenomenon that's often called promissory materialism. Now, let me break that down. Promissory means I'm making you a promise. Materialism is all I believe in is matter and energy. So promissory materialism is, well, I have this philosophical position. This philosophical position is contradicted by the facts as they stand, or the evidence as it stands, however you want to phrase that. But give me time, and we're working on explanations, and we'll eventually be able to solve all of the anomalies that don't fit with our materialist paradigm. And my response to that, you know, maybe several responses is, you know, first of all, okay, well, why don't you get back to us when you've got the theory in hand? Okay, because right now it looks like we've got a finite universe with a beginning. Right now, when we look at the fossil record, we see these sudden infusions of information at different points. We don't see the gradualism that Darwin predicted. So when you have a materialist explanation for this phenomenon, why don't you get back to us? In the meantime, is it okay if we be theists over here? But this is the thing. In the meantime, it's not okay for us to be theists. That's the thing. You know, Dawkins wants to, you know, he said this outrageous thing about putting Baptists in the zoo at some point in his writings. And I think he softened on that quite a bit. I don't want to hold him to some rash statements that he said earlier in his career, but it's really, in the meantime, it's really not okay. Like in the academy, you know, especially in certain fields, you're really hounded out if you are a believer in God. And so why should that be the case? Why is believing in God so bad when you're a professional academic? Why can't you teach at Harvard or Yale and believe in God? All of the evidence that we have as it stands now supports that. I mean, present cosmology, fine-tuning, origin of life, so on. It's all pointing to that as the fields stand now. So is it okay if we just, you know, take the common sense interpretation of the facts, as Hoyle said? Does that make sense?
It does. I wonder why that is the case. I don't know if it's just prejudice against Christians because of the moral commands that follow, or if it's because they believe that positing a Christian God will circumvent the scientific endeavor. And the reason I think it might be one of those things is I would imagine if you were like a high-up cosmologist or biologist and you were a pantheist, and you had a vague notion of this kind of eternal cause.
Yeah.
But you didn't give it any kind of characteristics that looked like the Christian or Muslim or Jewish God. I think you'd be okay, right? Like if you're a pantheist.
So. Yeah, I think.
Because that's very malleable.
Yeah, I think a little poking around and we'd find several pantheists that are doing fine and don't get any kind of persecution.
What is it about the personal God that bothers us? Again, to give the atheist they do, maybe it is just that. Maybe it's like, look, if we were to take you guys, you would say to us there's no need to do any of this exploration because we already have the answers.
Yeah.
Now, the history of science would seem to refute that because the history of science is replete with excellent, brilliant Christians who, precisely because they believe that the universe is intelligible, began to try to understand it.
Right.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, so the evidence is contrary to that. This idea, I don't know if you ever watched the Ken Ham, Bill Nye debate from 2014.
No, I would rather put my hand in a blender.
I watched the whole thing.
Okay.
And the aftermath because I thought it was an interesting. I did find it very interesting, even though, not buying into either of their paradigms. But it was an interesting cultural phenomena. But Bill Nye kept trying to say that you have to believe in evolution, otherwise you can't do good science. And I think he got the worst end of that argument because Ham kept pointing out young Earth creationists in this instance, And I'm not saying anything about young Earth creationism, but Ham kept pointing these guys who were brilliant scientists, and their beliefs in a young Earth didn't affect their ability to do, great technology, great science in the present. And so after a while, it got to be pretty old, and I thought, Bill Nye isn't helping himself with this argument because it's obviously not the case.
I would see why people take issue with the young Earth creationist.
Sure. Yeah,
and I wouldn't quickly say that they're able to do good science. If you're in the grip, if you're like ideologically captured, as it were, to some view that seems to have been disproven, that the Earth is several thousand years old or whatever.
Yeah, well, they would disagree with you that it's been disproven. But I mean, how if you're working for an oil company and oil exploration,
and
or
you're
if you're
showing
creating
your data, you're showing the paperwork.
Or if you're creating medical technology or something, it really doesn't affect. There's so much that very, very little is dependent on our view of origins in terms of
that's fair
modern engineering and so on. But anyway. So the response to the time thing is one response is, look, time has been helping the theistic argument. Another response is, look, you're giving us promissory materialism. In other words, you're saying, I don't have the goods now, but I should extend you a line of credit, apparently indefinitely, until you have all the arguments together to support materialism. And what if you never do, and is it okay if I'm a theist?
Because I've got like 20, 30, 40 more years here. I'd like to figure it out.
Yeah. In the meantime, the common sense interpretation is, there's a God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. So I'm glad we,
That's really helpful.
Is that helpful? Yeah.
Super helpful. Promissory materialism. I'm never going to forget that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You've referenced Darwin a few times. I'm not sure where you stand on this, but let's talk about the fossil, because you alluded a couple of times that the fossil record may itself be somehow evidence for a designer, but surely it's the case. Surely Catholicism allows for the case that one can believe in evolution and be a good Catholic. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. The church allows a wide range of views, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing to point out, because in a lot of the discussions of evolution, many people from both a Christian perspective or an atheistic perspective go into the discussion assuming that there are only two possible camps. One is full-out atheistic Darwinism, old Earth, common ancestor, random mutation plus natural selection explains everything, or biblical literalism and young Earth creationism and so on. So these are two, and you see that in Dawkins' writings, like in Blind Watchmaker. Many of the statements that he makes seems to assume that his only opposition out there comes from people that insist on a young Earth. And that's not the case. When we talk about evolution, there are several issues that are in motion, that are engaged here. And Plantinga pointed this out to us so many years ago when we studied under him at Notre Dame. But Plantinga would say, when you're talking about evolution, we got to distinguish different issues. One issue is the age of the universe and the age of the Earth. Okay, so that's, is it young, is it old? And that's a separate question actually from whether evolution is true. Okay, so you got that's a question. Then when you get to evolution is, when it's used in common discussion, it's usually indicating a combination of two ideas. One idea is common ancestry, that like all living things come from the amoeba. I know it's not an amoeba, right? But whatever it was, the first single-celled thing. Amoebas are rather complex. But anyway, the first simple single-celled thing, last common ancestor gave rise to all life. So that's common ancestry. And then apart from common ancestry, there's also the mechanism that's thought to explain why things develop from that common ancestor into all the diversity that we see. And that mechanism is usually phrased as random mutation plus natural selection. So random mutation means that living things, for unexplained reasons, I think nowadays we think we know some of the explanation, but sort of exhibit different varieties. So we have a whole litter of puppies, and some of them are black and some of them are white, et cetera. So that's randomness, so to speak. And then you have this process called natural selection that's supposed to operate on the random mutation. And so we have a litter, some puppies are black, some puppies are white, and then they all go out to hunt, and guess what? The black ones are much more effective hunting at night, and so happens that we live in a part of the world where food that dogs can eat tends to come out at night. So guess what? All the black puppies survive to adulthood, and the white puppies that are easier to spot at night, they all starve to death. And after a couple of generations of this, all dogs are black. Okay, so that's natural selection is that process of like favoring the black puppies over the white puppies. Okay, so random mutation plus natural selection is supposed to be, and that's often what Darwin is credited with having done. Is, it's claimed that he proved that natural selection plus random mutation is sufficient to explain everything that we see. Now, all three of those things are separate. So you can have somebody, for example, who believes in an old Earth, in an old universe, but does not believe in common ancestry. He thinks that, no, the different branches of life were created individually and are not related to one another. And you can have somebody who doesn't believe in common ancestry and doesn't believe in random mutation and natural selection. It says, no, that at best can explain why some puppies are black, or why there's more black puppies in a certain place, but it's not going to explain the origin of dogs. Okay, which, does that make sense?
Yeah.
They're pretty complicated.
Thursday, would you mind bringing the water, Josiah? Sorry, I left it out there, and I'm noticing that your thimble of espresso is almost out.
Yeah.
See how attentive I am? That's why my wife's so happy.
You're very solicitous.
Thank you very
for
much.
my welfare.
No, nothing.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah, black puppies.
So okay, so you can have any combination. So you have you do have. In fact, I know several people that believe in an old Earth but don't believe in common ancestry or random mutation, natural selection. I know others who believe in an old Earth and they believe in common ancestry but don't believe in random mutation, natural selection. And I suppose there's other theoretical mixtures of that. So it's not,
it's not binary.
It's not binary. There's a spectrum across, and so it's helpful to realize that. And also when we're talking about evolution, the distinction is often made, and I think it's a useful one, even though I have some quibbles about some of the terminology, but usually microevolution is distinguished from macroevolution. So microevolution is usually described as the variation of characters within a kind of animal. And so over time, and I think this is, nobody has a problem with this, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you go to, say, the Ken Ham's Noah's Ark, which I went there with my mom one time. And it's interesting there, the animals that they have in the Ark don't look like animals that we have today. Mm. So even kind of hardcore young Earth creationists, would agree that, by their chronology, 4,000 years ago, animals didn't look like they do. But they're the same kind of animal. They're hoofed animals or they're dogs or whatever. So that's microevolution, which is the changing of features as we progress through time within a species or maybe a genre of animal. Mm-hmm. Macroevolution is the whole story. That's from single-celled animal all the way to human being, and all the transitions in between are by these, as Darwin describes it, like insensibly fine-graded transitions. So, the way Darwin describes it in The Origin of Species is, the steps from one species to another are so small that they're almost minuscule, almost insensible, you wouldn't even notice them, but they all add up, and over thousands and thousands of steps, eventually you go from a bear to a whale, and there's legitimate question about whether is that really possible? It can do like small steps, because some of these transitions are pretty huge. And then the other big problem is we don't see those steps in the fossil record. We have, as it were, kind of a film roll of life on Earth, and that's in the fossils. There's, much like old style film where you had individual frames, right? You can look at the different layers of the fossil record as frames in a movie that are shot, and then some motion happens in another frame, and so on, all the way up the fossil record. And so what Darwin predicted, and what is not the case, and he knew it wasn't the case, but what his theory predicts is that you should start with, a single-celled animal, and then it should diversify, and you get some different species of single-celled animal, and then they diversify some more, and they should diversify into different families and different orders, and up the hierarchy of biological classification. And then after a long, long time, finally, you should get, the very distinct differences between even like completely separate body plans, which is characteristic of what we call phyla. Phyla are clades, or groups of organisms that all share the same body plan. Arthropods would be a good example. Those are animals that have an exoskeleton, basically. So insects and shellfish and so on. Vertebrates, or really chordates, animals that have a backbone, would be another phyla. It's like a body plan. Okay, so that's what Darwin predicts. So does that make sense? You start small, and you get a little bit of difference, more difference, and then a huge difference.
And your point is, if that were the case, which we should expect to see this in the fossil record.
We should see this in the fossil record.
We don't. Therefore, something different must have occurred.
Right.
What do the evolutionists say in response to that? Is it that we haven't found them yet? Is it that they've been destroyed? Is it what?
Yeah. Well, first, let's just talk about the fossil record for just a second. So for most of the fossil record, we just have single-celled animals for billions of years, according to standard chronology. And then around, 600 million years ago, we get a blast of what's called the Ediacaran explosion, or just call it the Ediacaran explosion. That's sufficient. And we get these strange life forms that just look like plants, and they don't have any organs, they don't have any limbs, they don't have any like eyes, etc. It's a very simple, like pincushion-like, pillow-like organisms, and they last for a while. And then around, say, you could put at different points, but say maybe 543 million years or so ago, you get what's called the Cambrian explosion, and that's a big explosion where suddenly almost all the phyla, the body plans that are still in existence, okay, suddenly appear at once. Examples of all the different body plans of animals.
Okay.
Bang! There they are. That's why it's called the explosion. Okay. No transition. In fact, the transition from the Ediacaran, which are these very simple animals, to the Cambrian with all these different body plans is so abrupt. There are studies that put only like a window of 500,000 years between the last time in the fossil record that you see these very simple precursors and then boom, when you get the Cambrian animals. And the Cambrian animals are amazingly complex. They're as complex as lobsters or many modern. That's what fish appear for the first time in the Cambrian, and some of these creatures. I mean, they don't look like, most of them don't look like things that are around today, but they're very complicated and wonderful and amazing and so on. So that's really kind of awe-inspiring.
Yeah,
and they just all appear at once. Okay, and Dawkins admits that. In The Blind Watchmaker, he admits that. He has a famous line where he says, they all appear as if they were just planted there without any evolutionary precursors, and creationists are delighted by this. And, I don't know anybody who disputes that this is a reality of the fossil record. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Stephen Meyer and Darwin's Doubt, because this is an entire book about this phenomena of the Cambrian explosion.
Yeah, the subtitle is The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design.
Right, yeah. So if folks are dissatisfied with my kind of lay-level explanations, they can read Meyer, okay? And he goes very methodically through this whole process of thought and looks at all the different options. So you asked what evolutionists say in response.
To not having this
to
fossil
this
record.
Okay.
Yep.
So Dawkins says, this is a true gap. We need the fossils. The theory demands transitional fossils. They've just been all washed away or they've been all eroded away.
Right.
It's just a gap. Yep. Okay. That is a minority opinion among paleontologists. Folks that actually work with the fossils probably by and large don't agree with that. Let me give an example. Simon Conway Morris, very, very well-respected biologist, paleontologist. I don't know what exactly his home base would be, but worked at Cambridge for much of his career. He's retired now. Has made some important contributions to the understanding of the Cambrian. Wrote an important paper documenting fossil fish, for example, already in the Cambrian. And Simon Conway Morris gave a virtual talk at Franciscan University a couple of years ago. They were Zooming him in, and Q&A afterwards. And I got in line and I wanted to ask him about the Cambrian explosion. So Cambridge trained and high up. Don't get much higher than that, kind of expert in this field, interviewed and written on this subject. So I asked him, Dr. Morris, about the Cambrian explosion. Do you believe it's an artifact of the evolutionary record or the fossil record? That means it's only appears to be explosive because we're missing the fossils below. And if you don't believe it's an artifact, what do you believe is the explanation? And he said, first of all, I don't believe it was an artifact; it was a real event. Okay, so that's interesting. So that kind of contradicts Dawkins.
Yeah.
And then he said, and he was very honest. He said he doesn't know the explanation, but he thinks that an increase in oxygen plus the Ediacaran animals, these simple animals that came before, play into the role of the explanation. Well, I found that very interesting, and I don't fault him at all. He's a lovely man and a fellow Catholic, and God bless him. We'll only wish him the best. But that's not much of an explanation. Okay, a rise in oxygen levels and the Ediacaran animals. The problem with the Ediacaran animals, that's these simple animals that came before the Cambrian ones. A lot of folks don't believe they're related at all to the animals that come later. They believe they just went extinct, and if there is which most people believe, whatever evolutionary trajectory led to the animals that we see in the Cambrian, it went around the Ediacaran and are just, not captured. Okay, so the Ediacaran aren't helping much. And then the latest evidence shows there wasn't actually a rise in oxygen levels that, so therefore that wasn't a cause of, the explosion of information. Aside from the fact that rises in oxygen levels at best would be a sufficient, might be a necessary precursor for an explosion of life, but it wouldn't be sufficient to explain why we have all this biological information that suddenly appears at a certain point in the fossil record. So, we can do experiments. We can, put animals into high oxygen environments and see if they suddenly, have a huge explosion of information in their DNA. And I can tell you right now, it's not going to do it. It's not going to help. So it really told me that Dr. Morris doesn't have an explanation. I've asked many other people. And really for me, what I've wondered is, why is this not a defeater to the whole theory? And this gets back to Alvin Plantinga. Studying under Plantinga in the philosophy of science, Plantinga employed this idea of a defeater. Mm-hmm. A defeater is like a brute fact that is so anomalous to your paradigm.
Epistemological paradigm.
Yeah, that you just have to abandon the paradigm.
Yeah.
And I've asked many scientists this, okay? Point blank. I'm like, look, this is what the fossil record shows. Why is this not a defeater to the whole Darwinian paradigm? And nobody answers me. Okay.
You've got a book here, Why Evolution is True. Presumably he addresses it in that book.
No, he doesn't. And let me hold this up. I read this through carefully and I assign this when I teach religion and science, because I don't want to be somebody who just indoctrinates towards one idea, right? So I tell my students, we're going to read both sides. So we're going to read this. And I've read it carefully, like page by page, all right, what Jerry Coyne's arguments are. And it was really reading Coyne's book that helped persuade me that evolution is not true, at least not in the Darwinian sense.
Right.
Okay. And why is that? Well, I went into reading his book knowing that one of the biggest problems for Darwinian theory is the Cambrian explosion. So I go in reading, eager to see how he's going to treat it. And he gets to the chapter where he's talking about the fossil record, and he gives a description of about a page. In about a page and maybe a page and a half, he recounts the history of life. And when he's recounting that history of life, he completely omits to mention the Cambrian explosion. To mention the Cambrian explosion. However, even though in his text, the body text of the book, he doesn't mention it, he does have a graph. And in the graph, it says Cambrian explosion. Yeah. Like, can we talk about that a little bit?
No? Okay.
No, apparently not. And Matt, I don't know if your kids, are your kids involved in the debate club in Steubenville?
But they debate me a lot.
Okay. Well, there's a very popular homeschool debate club in Steubenville you probably know. And many people are involved. Almost all my kids are involved in that. And through my kids being involved in debate club, I learned some of the principles of argumentation of formal debate.
Right.
One of the things I learned was that if your opponent raises like a killer issue for your case and you don't respond to it, you lose the debate. And I was, and when I would go and watch my kids debate, oftentimes I wouldn't pick up on this because I'm kind of a lay observer, and most lay observers of debates aren't following the logic that's going on. They're allowing themselves to be swayed by emotion. Yep,
the charm of the people presenting
their
the
rhetorical ability. And so you can get to the end of the debate and like, boy, and oftentimes I would be in this as a parent and I feel like, oh, that side clearly won because they persuaded emotionally and their rhetoric was better. And then the judges do the adjudication and surprise, surprise, the other team actually gets awarded. Why is that? It's because the judges are actually keeping careful track of whether the different pieces of evidence and argument are being responded to adequately. And it's called dropping an argument.
Yeah.
If the other side raises
Right.
something very important, and then you don't address it, and you just drop it, you lose the debate. Okay?
Or at least the point, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You wouldn't lose the debate, maybe,
Well,
but it would be a mark against you.
Yeah, it's a mark. It depends on the weight
Yeah.
of possibly if you drop something that's kind of only modest significance.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was of pretty, of great significance,
And you refuse to engage with it.
and you refuse to gauge it, then you probably would lose the debate from dropping it.
Yeah.
Right. So when I saw that Coyne drops the question, okay, drops the issue and did not address, all right, I'm like, oh my gosh, Meyer, Darwin's doubt here.
Yeah.
He's really on to something
Yes.
that the other side isn't afraid to engage. Okay?
A quick objection maybe here that might help clarify this for me. If the Cambrian explosion is an argument against Darwinian evolution,
Right.
how is it not also an argument against the Bible?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Right.
we have 6 days of creation.
Right.
You're telling me that there was a stage, and then after I don't know how long there was.
Right.
So, like, what is the kind of biblical the fundamentalist? Let's to use that. I know that's a pejorative term. What's he saying then? If he thinks this is an objection to Darwinian evolution, is he saying that God created and then after a long time he created again? Like, what do they think the explosion is?
Are you saying like young earthers?
Yeah, good point. I don't know. Like, I guess somebody who wants to reject macroevolution entirely. How do they view? Is that what Meyer does? By the way, does he reject?
Yeah, Meyer rejects macroevolution.
All right. So, what would he say it is then? What's his hypothesis?
Meyer says, look, this is the infusion of intelligence.
Right. So So that goes back to my point about the 6 days of creation. We have man created on the 6th day.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like 24-hour period before something else.
Right. So Meyer and those who would argue with him would say, the creation narrative is primarily theological,
Okay.
not scientific.
Okay. So he would agree
in
with
our
that.
sense of it.
Yep.
So that we're seeing the creation of a temple for the worship of God. That's the
Right.
logic. And have you seen
Of course.
I've got a graph in Bible Basics.
Day 1, day 2, day
Day
3.
3. Yeah.
The habitats are created.
Yeah.
Day 4, 5, 6.
So so what the creation story is not showing us a literal history of.
See, there I go with the binary thing again.
Yeah.
Right? Even me, I'm like, okay, so he's denying Darwinian evolution, therefore he must believe 24-hour periods.
Right.
That's
right.
good. That's helpful.
Yeah. No, that's and thank you for the chance to clarify that. So, right. So, the Cambrian is onto something. And Dawkins again, he says, well, all the fossils were washed away or eroded. The problem is though that in several locations around the globe, we do have the rock layers that precede the Cambrian, and that's where we find the Ediacaran. That's where you find these simple animals that don't look related at all. And maybe for our viewers, we can pull up some images, and I'll give some to Josiah, so they can kind of see and contrast what these Precambrian Ediacaran biota. We don't even know if they're animals or plants. They're so mysterious. What they look like contrasted to, Cambrian, which are so much more complex. And again, no transition in between. So, and another person I want to give some call out to is, well, you had him on the show, Gunter Beckley. Gunter is awesome at this because he is a professional paleontologist. So he knows this stuff back and forth, and when I get into it, I'm worried about like mispronouncing my terms and getting the dates off of it. His mind is like a steel trap. But not only does he point this out, but he points out that it's not just the Cambrian explosion, but this is a pattern that recurs throughout the history of life. We keep getting these explosions. So we have the flowering plant explosion, for example, angiosperms. We kind of take them for granted, but flowering plants are a kind of plant life. And they just explode onto the scene with no precursors at a certain point in geological history. We have the bird explosion. You get a few few kind of, quote unquote, early birds. And then all of a sudden, bang, there's all the birds, called the avian explosion, and several others.
Wow.
Where's my book? Go ahead.
While you're looking for that, so would Maya...
Anyway, my book, God's Grandeur, not my book, but the book I contributed to it, yeah, Beckley's got a chapter in there on the fossil record, and it's a great, succinct read for anybody who wants to become aware of all the explosions, the sudden bursts of new life that the fossil records show.
And was that Emmaus? Who published that?
That was Sophia Institute.
Yeah. Is Maya saying what the Big Bang is for God, the Cambrian explosion is to Genesis? Is that the kind of... Is that where he's leading us?
Animal life.
To animal life.
The Cambrian is the Big Bang of animal life.
But the reason I say to Genesis is he saying that the Cambrian explosion is kind of more in keeping with how Genesis is described and how Darwinian evolution is laid out? What
Meyer doesn't have a dog in the fight about the interpretation of Scripture.
Okay.
And he works for the Discovery Institute, and the Discovery Institute is in part it fosters. It's not the only thing it does, but one of the things the Discovery Institute does is provide funding for continued research on intelligent design theory, which is the idea that certain aspects of the natural world are best explained by an intelligence rather than by undirected causes, right? And so Meyer's only interest is to say, look, this is pointing to an intelligence, okay? And that's about as far as he goes.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can take it from there.
It's a modest claim.
Right. It's a modest claim. Right. It's a modest claim, and therefore it can be a big tent movement. So a lot of people are agreed that it represents an intelligence. In fact, curiously, Fred Hoyle, the great British astrophysicist, he agreed that life shows the signs of intelligence. He just appealed to aliens to explain it. So that's where he ended up at the end of his career. He said that he explained the origin of life in that the Earth was seeded with life from outer space.
Didn't Dawkins say something similar? Well, either way, Fred Hoyle did.
Fred Hoyle did. Yeah, I don't think Dawkins says that.
But how wild that you have to appeal to extraterrestrial life to explain
it
life
seems,
on Earth.
It seems wild, but then, if he's wrong for the right reasons, because he's recognizing just the incredible odds against the spontaneous formation of life on Earth without direction. Okay. And Hoyle was so impressed by that. I mean, he did all the calculations himself, and he came up with a number of 1 to 10 to the 40,000th. And he said, the odds against the spontaneous formation of life on Earth is just like astronomical. He has a quote where he says, "That's a number so big it can bury, all of Darwinism." And so that's Fred Hoyle, who was kind of like didn't know what he thought about, a God, etc. But he and his disciples are still around, go with it. It's called directed panspermia. It's that, aliens exist somewhere and they seeded life on Earth. On the one hand, I'm kind of sympathetic because at least he's recognizing that life on Earth had to be formed by an intelligence. It really bespeaks the need for an intelligent designer. Wow. On the other hand, I feel like he's just kicking the can down the road, because then you have to explain what's the origin of aliens.
I see. So whereas Dawkins would say the fossil record was somehow washed away, that's the only reason we don't have it. Right. You're saying that's a minority position.
Right.
And people like Fred Hoyle, their other explanation would be something like aliens seeded the planet. Is there some other explanation that materialists point to justify these explosions? For the like the Cambrian explosion? Okay. The two options are, I would say, two main options that I've seen argued in print are Dawkins' position that, the transitions were there, they just weren't captured by the fossil record, either because they've eroded away, or the animals were soft-bodied and they weren't preserved. There's a real problem with that argument because because that sounds reasonable to me. So what's the problem?
Because a lot of the Ediacaran biota living things. We say biota when we don't know whether they're animals or plants. Okay, they're just living things. That's what biota means.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So, so the ediacaran organisms that show up in the fossil record in the few places on the planet where we have those sedimentary layers that are Precambrian, many of those appear to be soft-bodied, and we have like sponge embryos, which are very delicate. Those are fossilized in that layer. So we do have soft.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have a lot of very soft-bodied things that are preserved, but none of them are what we would expect to be transitional fossils to the Cambrian. So we do have snapshots of that period of life, and the ediacaran itself just kind of appears suddenly, right? And these other explosions, like the bird explosion or the angiosperm explosion, they appear suddenly. So anyway, so we have these sudden explosions of life, and okay, back to what do atheistic evolutionists appeal to? One is we just don't have the transitions. That's problematic. That's a problematic view because we do have fossils below, but they aren't transitional fossils. Okay. So that seems to be kind of special pleading. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. The other possibility is they appeal to non-Darwinian mechanisms.
Okay.
Possible like mutations that might change the whole character of an organism very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The problem with that is if, we do know of some mutations that will change the body of an animal very quickly in rather dramatic ways, but almost all of those ways are lethal.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe you've seen like these fly experiments where they mutate the Hox genes on fruit flies, but what you get is these, grotesque things where like the fly will grow legs out of its head, or his body parts will be in the wrong order. It's like, oh, that looks painful.
Right.
And it is painful. And usually they're born dead. Or if they do survive, they don't reproduce. So, and ironically, Dawkins comes to my defense here. In Blind Watchmaker, Dawkins argues multiple times that fast evolution doesn't work. Okay, you can't get rapid changes. Evolution must be slow. It must be gradual. One of the reasons that he gives for evolution needing to be gradual is that if you make a big biological jump, if you think of the possibilities of biological form as being a big space, like this big playground is all the possible things that you can be as a living organism. So here you are over here, you're a squirrel, and you want to jump over to being a whale.
Yeah.
Okay. If you make that leap, you're very liable to land in a spot where you're dead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot more ways of being dead than there are being alive. And Dawkins himself makes the argument. Okay. And so he says you can't have these big jumps. These big jumps are liable to be lethal.
All right. So
some of the scientists who have responded to Meyer's book, Darwin's Doubt, have said, oh, well, it's the reorganization of gene regulatory networks, or maybe it's the mutation of Hox genes. These are, won't take the time to go into all those, but what those would be like kind of massive mutations that would affect the whole way that the organism develops as an embryo, But when we try those things experimentally, they almost invariably end up with a dead animal.
Okay.
And when you look at living beings, they don't vary in those ways. Like animals aren't born with variation in their body plan. Okay, that would kill them. So dogs all have the dog body plan, etc. And if they don't, it's lethal. So random mutation in such a fundamental characteristic of the organism's way of being would be lethal and basically don't happen. So natural selection doesn't have anything to work with. It's not like personifying natural selection for a moment. It's not like natural selection can say, oh, I've got puppies that have, the body plan of an arthropod, and I've got puppies that have an echinoderm body plan. That's like a sea urchin body plan, and so I can select among them, in order to develop. You don't need it because you don't get that variation. That doesn't occur in nature.
Okay.
So it's a real conundrum. It's much like the conundrum of the origin of life.
Interesting.
It's where
have you surely Catholic? Thinking of Father Nicanor Austriaco, who's a Dominican, who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, holds to Darwinian evolution.
Right.
Is that right? He's a proponent of it?
I think he is.
What does it mean to hold to Darwinian evolution? Because obviously it's not like to be a Darwinian evolutionist is to think that Darwin got everything 100% correct. Science doesn't work like that. He's not infallible.
Right.
So one can hold to his view of things while modifying them. So I'm not sure where he is on the spectrum. But have you looked at Catholics who hold to this? How do they
I have looked at, the Catholics that I've looked at don't deal with the issue. They will, maybe point to, there's one or two ediacaran organisms that you could press into service as a transitional form to the Cambrian. But the problem there is you don't need just one or two. You need thousands, and then you need them in a sequence. So just pointing to one or two organisms that maybe, possibly, and there's dispute about it, a transitional form, that doesn't help a whole lot.
Okay.
The other thing that I've seen Catholic theorists appeal to is again these non-Darwinian explanations. They will point out, for example, that a lot of the genes that we use for the proteins of our body are already present in single-celled organisms, and that's true because we're composed of single cells. Mm-hmm. So it kind of stands to reason, right? So, but that, and the suggestion is, because we share a lot, even with single-celled organisms, I guess the implication is supposed to be, that would make it easy and rapid to move from a single-celled organism to a complicated Cambrian animal that's like a shellfish, like a lobster-like shellfish or something like that. But that is a very circuitous path that includes a lot of biological data. And when you look at what's called the waiting time problem, which is how long do you have to wait around for a beneficial mutation?
Yep.
Where you're just not going to get enough beneficial mutations in the very narrow window that the fossil record permits to you between, say, the Ediacaran and the Cambrian, which is very, 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 very short. But folks that want to go into it, what I respect about Meyer is he very carefully, to the point of making for slow reading. It's like, please, can we hurry this up a little bit?
I get it.
But he is crossing every T and dotting every I because he knows that this is undergo great scrutiny. So I'm not doing him justice here, but for those who want more and want to run down every possible alternative explanation for how we could get this explosion of life in the Cambrian, he does follow every track down to its end, which is why I respect him. That's why I look at how thick these books are.
Right, and these are his layman books, right? These aren't dissertations. These are for lay readers.
Right, exactly.
Right, okay.
So, I'd refer folks to that.
All right. Can we move on from the fossil record? Because, I want to tell you about Hallow, which is the #1 downloaded prayer app in the world. It's outstanding. Hallow.com/Matt Fradd. Sign up over there right now and you will get the first 3 months for free. That's like a lot of time. You can decide whether it's useful to you or not, whether it's helpful. If you don't like it, you can always quit. Hallow.com/Matt Fradd. I use it. My family uses it. It's fantastic. There are over 10,000 audio guided prayers, meditations, and music, including my lo-fi. Hallow has been downloaded over 15 million times in 150 different countries. It helps you pray, helps you meditate, helps you sleep better. It helps you build a daily routine and a habit of prayer. There's honestly so much excellent stuff on this app that it's difficult to get through it all. Just go check it out. Hallow.com/Matt Fradd. The link is in the description below. It even has an entire section for kids. So if you're a parent, you could play little Bible stories to them at night. It'll help them pray. Fantastic. hallo.com/Matt This has been so fascinating. I wanted to talk to you about maybe what quantum mechanics and quantum physics has to say about a creator. And then if we have time, I'd like to talk about out-of-body experiences, exorcisms. I mean, there's other things that would seem to point to a creator.
Yeah.
Or near-death experiences, these sorts of things.
Right, absolutely. So let's begin with quantum mechanics, which is the science of the very, very small. When we're dealing with individual electrons, individual photons, which is like a single particle of light. And the amazing thing that was discovered in the early 20th century when researchers like Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, Denmark, began to work on this science. One of the things that was discovered very early on was that conscious observation appears to influence the behavior of these subatomic particles. Mm-hmm. And this is mind-blowing, and it was unanticipated, and it was really resisted, okay? So everybody, when we talk about quantum mechanics, most folks, go first to a famous experiment that was first done in the early 20th century called the double slit experiment.
Yeah.
You've heard of it.
Well, I'm familiar with it from the first episode of The Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
Where,
I never watched the.
It's not worth watching, but there's a lot of trash in it. A lot of. But it's extraordinarily well written, and they talk about this at the beginning. So, what is the double slit experiment?
Okay, so the double slit experiment was an experiment where researchers decided to shoot photons through two slits in a barrier.
Okay.
And what they expected was, photons, which they imagined to be particles, are going to be shot through the slit. And so
you've got like a photon shooter, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, you've got a photon shooter,
and
right?
And what are they trying to do? Shoot it through one slit and then shoot it through the other?
Right. And there's a great animation of this on YouTube. I think it's called Dr. Quantum.
Okay.
And we can put the link in the program notes, and folks can look at it. But it does a great job, and I think it's one of the best heuristic devices to kind of understand this. But yes, absolutely. So in the animation, that's precisely what they do. They've got a photon shooter here, just to think about it simply, and you've got a barrier with two slits in it, and then you've got a screen behind the barrier that's going to receive the impression of the photon. It's going to be hit by it. So you shoot the photons at the two slits, and the expectation was that you'd get two slits on the screen from where the
photons hit them.
Where the photons hit them. That's not what they got. Instead, they got what's called an interference pattern, which is a series of bands that you get when two waves interfere with each other when they're coming from two sources. So if you have, for example, if you have a basin of water and you put two vibrating objects onto the surface of the water that are creating waves, so you got waves emanating from two sources. The waves come together, and where their crests meet, you get a high amplitude of double the amplitude, and where their crest and trough meets, they cancel itself out, and you get nothing. And then if you put a screen on the other side and allow the waves to hit, you get a classic pattern that scientists recognize usually immediately, which is a kind of a characteristic series of bands that represents an interference pattern. A light band and a dark band, a light band and a dark band. And that's from the waves either combining to increase their amplitude or to cancel it out. So these quantum these scientists working on, the science of the very small, they shoot the photons through the two slits, and they get a wave pattern on the other side.
Why does there have to be two slits? Why can't they what happens if they shot it through one?
Well, that's a good question. The problem with shooting it through just one is, well, let's get back. That's shooting through just one creates some interesting, dynamics as well. But let's just stay with the two slits for a moment, because the two slits would be expected to create an interference pattern if you were sending a wave through, but not if you were sending a particle through. Okay, so we're kind of learning about the properties of light. So the pattern that comes on the screen from shooting photons through the two slits suggests that the photon is acting like a wave, and that's counterintuitive, because it was thought that a photon was just this little particle of light, a single quantum, a single unit of light. So they decided to watch. Let's put an observational mechanism right at the slits and kind of observe the photons coming through and see if we can figure out what happens. And they found that when they did that, when they observed the photons, even through an instrument, it's not like with the naked eye, but through instrumentation, basically creating a knowledge path from the behavior of the photon to their mind, then the photon stopped acting like a wave and started acting like a particle, and you got the two...
What?
Yeah. You get the two slits on the screen.
That showed the impression of two photons.
Yeah.
Once it was observed.
Well, they shoot many photons, and on the other side you get two strips as if you had shot bullets.
So you're saying that when they shot the photons, and people are going to be watching this and they already know this, but this is blowing my mind. So it turns out Big Bang Theory didn't educate me sufficiently. So you're saying when they shoot the protons through the two...
photons,
sorry,
protons,
thank you.
That's okay.
Photons through the two slits without a mechanism to observe it, it appeared as a wave, whatever the hell that is.
Yeah.
But when they shot the photons through the double slits and had a mechanism that did observe it...
Right. They behave like particles.
They behaved like photons.
Yeah, like photons were expected to behave, like particles of light.
What the hell is that?
Yes, yeah. Well,
Excuse my language, but what does that...
That's been the question ever since. And I think the Dr. Quantum videos that I recommend people watch on this, I think it's part of a larger video that's called something like "What the Bleep is Going On?" So this is mysterious.
Because
So it's showing us that reality is much weirder than we think.
You're not kidding.
In fact, I think it's Werner Heisenberg. People may have heard of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and stuff like that, but very famous quantum physicist. I think he said at one point that not only is nature weirder than we think, it's weirder than we can think. But
okay, so I understand that the photon is not accessible to the naked eye. But what happened if they tried to observe between the slits and the screen? I mean, why wouldn't it behave like a photon at that point? Why did it need a specific, whatever it was that picked it up?
Right.
For it to act like a particle.
Basically... in
both instances, something's observing it. You've got a human or you've got a camera.
Right. Yeah. So the screen at the back, they're shooting the photons through the slits, to the screen at the back, and the screen is just picking up the energy, that from the photons that are being shot, and again, when the path of the photons was not being scrutinized,
I see.
You're looking away, you're not keeping track of the information of the path.
That's when it acted like a wave.
Then it acts like a wave.
But what I'm saying is, what if the human tried to see it between the slits and the screen? He can't. I understand he can't, but there's still an observer there.
Right. Well, if
who's not observing because he can't see.
If you were able to observe, it would behave as a particle.
Jiminy Cricket.
But basically what they found, they played with this experiment, tried to do everything they could. They thought, there must be something else causing it. But all the different ways that they would set up the experiment, what they discovered is whenever there was excuse me if I use the language of philosophy, but in Plantinga, he's an epistemologist, right? So whenever there was an epistemological chain between the behavior of the particle to the knower, then it would behave as a particle. And whenever you smeared that out, or either destroyed or didn't record or didn't look or didn't observe or whatever, so that there was no epistemological chain between the particle and the knower, then it would behave as a wave.
So if you put a camera that wasn't sophisticated enough to detect it, so it's still being viewed.
It's not gonna do it.
Crikey.
Yeah. It is pretty crazy stuff. It's pretty crazy stuff. And here's a good time for me to appeal to people who know this stuff much better.
Wow.
But I recommend the works of Henry P. Stopp. Okay. Stopp worked with Wolfgang Pauli and Werner Heisenberg.
Now
Under them.
Keep going.
And these are famous guys. Folks that know the field will recognize that those are famous guys. And Stopp worked right under them. And Stopp has written popular books on this. This is called Mindful Universe, Quantum Mechanics, and the Participating Observer. And basically what Stopp argues, and he knows many of the original players in the development of this field. Yeah.
I'll read it while you're talking.
Yeah. So it's quite a book to swallow. But what Stopp argues there is he says, look, the original researchers that established the field of quantum mechanics, and they're generally called the Copenhagen School, okay? Because they are all associated with Niels Bohr and his lab in Copenhagen, Denmark, and so on. But there's the one that set up the formulas, and these formulas do work. Like, you can do the math, and you can do statistical predictions about the behaviors of these subatomic particles. But the interesting thing about the behavior of these subatomic particles is their behavior is influenced by the decisions of the observer. So what and how the observer decides to observe is going to, it doesn't make just anything happen, right? But it does decide within a narrow possibility of occurrences which of those is actually manifest. So, in other words, the experimenter is influencing the behavior of matter and energy. And the experimenter is part of the equations. And this is mind-blowing because up until the discovery of quantum mechanics, we were dealing with what's now called a Newtonian or a classical view of reality, which is that all of reality goes down to fundamental particles, atoms or whatever, and they behave like billiard balls, bouncing around and striking one another, and that's all there is, essentially. That's all what matter reduces. And so if you knew the mass and the momentum and the vector of every single particle, you could predict the future, and it's all deterministic, right?
That's how free will sounds like it's explained by materialists. If we just had all the info, we would know what you were going to do.
We would know, right, exactly. And so that view of the universe, that's often called a Newtonian view of the universe, and now it's called a classical view because it's a pre-quantum view, okay, does lend itself to material determinism. And the funny thing is, even though it's 100 years since quantum mechanics was developed, you still find probably most philosophers as well as natural scientists looking at the world through a classical lens, through a lens where material causality is determined, and so you don't need any ghosts in the machine, and there's nothing for mind to do, there's nothing for God to do, etc. And that's a false view, as Stopp emphasizes time and again. That mechanically deterministic view of the universe has been disproven by quantum mechanics. Actually, in Heisenberg, under whom Stopp worked, Heisenberg is famous for what's called his uncertainty principle, that you don't know the behavior of these subatomic particles. You can't know both. Technically, I think Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is you can't know both I think it's the momentum and the position of a particle at the same time. It's something, the specifics of it are kind of inconsequential, but there's an inability for us to know everything about these fundamental particles. Can't be known, and to a certain extent, oftentimes It's not known because they exist as waves of potentiality. And until they are observed,
Wow.
they won't take a single location. Okay, but when they are observed, when you create an epistemological link between the particle and the knower, or the consciousness, what happens is what's called the collapse of the wave function. This realm of possibilities will collapse onto a single possibility and will be manifest.
This machine that's observing the photons, what is it? Like a camera, some kind of...
Yeah. So so some kind of camera.
Okay, but when the camera observes the photons, there isn't necessarily an observer. There's not I presume that you can have a camera take a video of this and it changes the...
Right. Well, it records, okay?
Yeah, it records. But
records the behavior.
My point is that even if no one watches the video, presumably they're acting like particles.
Yeah, if it's recorded in such a way that the knower can find out.
Can find out,
yeah.
So it's not a direct link between...
No, it's not like your naked eye. There's a chain of instruments.
Yeah.
But
even that.
But it is truly mind-blowing. Yeah, and for the specifics, it gets really,
Oh, golly.
And
I don't know how
don't ask me exactly
plastic
what
is
kind
made,
of...
so I'm not going to read that book.
But
that's wild.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy.
All right, so what?
So the upshot of that is, look, many times the argument that's made against Christianity or other theistic religions is that we don't need mind, we don't need God, we don't need spirits.
We don't have free will.
We don't have free will. It's just this closed shop, okay? It's a closed system of material determinism. And stop is saying we got to stop thinking like that. We've known that's been false for 100 years.
Well, we've actually known that's false for like thousands of years.
For more than that.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? It's sort of like when people come up with these very complex arguments for why like the self, traditionally understood, doesn't exist, a la Hume.
Yeah.
Right? Or the latest atheist telling me that I don't have free will.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? I'm pretty sure that even if all the arguments are on your side, I'm still within my rights to reject what you're saying because of my immediate experience of my free will and myself.
Right.
Same is true with God. There was. I mean, I think Plantinga did a lot to make theistic belief respectable in philosophical circles in universities. But prior to him, it seems like the theist is within his rights, even in the face of atheistic arguments, for a similar reason for accepting free will and the self traditionally understood, to say, I know that God exists. And you're right. Those all sound really complicated, but I'm...
Plantinga has this category that he calls basic beliefs. Yeah. Which are, might call them beliefs that are kind of self-evident or... More than
that, not just... Yeah, so I think you got a few here. You've got incorrigible, right? Self-evident, but more than just that, right? Because if the only beliefs that could be properly basic are those that are self-evident, that proposition isn't self-evident, therefore that's a self-defeating proposition.
Right.
So it seems to me, like the existence of other minds, and things like this. And memory
beliefs, what I had for breakfast and so on.
Like it seems
Plantinga says you don't have to have an argument for everything, and the existence of God falls into that category of basic beliefs that you don't need to necessarily
basic
have
beliefs,
an argument.
And then the reason he calls them proper basic beliefs are justified truth, right? I think that's the distinction, because you can have a basic belief that isn't proper. That is to say, you're not within your epistemic rights to accept it. But then you can have basic beliefs that are proper. That is to say, justified, I think is what he means.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah. So that's So this is mind blowing, and this is why I'm a generalist, right, and a layman, and I got to stand on the shoulders of these great scientists whose stuff I can read and I can understand what they're saying, but they're the ones doing the research. But the value in being a generalist and looking at the whole picture of this, we've talked about cosmology all the way, from the very big, that's the whole universe, right, to the very small, individual photon, is you see kind of the chorus of what nature is trying to tell us. So the Big Bang points to a God, fine-tuning points to a God, the fossil record points to a creative intelligence, and then quantum mechanics is saying, consciousness is involved is involved in the behavior of these fundamental particles. And Stott, makes the argument that you have to have had, that means that consciousness had to have existed from the beginning of creation, because certain material interactions are only going to take place in the presence of an observer. So you need the observer to collapse the wave of potentialities so that the wave becomes a particular point. And obviously human observers weren't present at the Big Bang, so you have to have some kind of other consciousness that's, wonder who could that be, So this is, we're seeing that far from our belief in God being contrary to the cutting edge of modern science and so on. There's a lot within, the cutting edge of science that's actually supportive of that across a broad range of fields. But what I found, Matt, is that even when you get a doctorate in chemistry, for example, you don't need to study the fossil record to do that. You don't have to take courses in logic to do that. In philosophy, you don't have to study the history of science actually to get advanced degrees in chemistry and stuff like that. So you can come out and you just basically know your field. Okay, and we're all like that. That's true of biblical studies as well. And even in biblical studies, I find fellow biblical scholars who only really know, say, the Pentateuch.
That's right. Because as science advances, it's not that you know your field, it's that you know one square millimeter.
Right, a part of the
field. As
field.
the field continues to expand.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is you could take a person who has a doctorate in philosophy and a person who has a doctorate in physics. Mm-hmm. And the person in philosophy might know more about the fossil record than the guy who has the doctorate in physics.
Right.
Because the physicist never took time to study it.
More education than the philosopher necessarily.
Right. But there's a common impression that if you've got a degree in natural science, you're somehow omniscient across the whole field.
Yes.
And that's not the case. And once any one of us get out of our silo, where we are, most of us, on the level of an undergraduate education. Okay. So if I, as a Bible scholar, talk to my friend who is, say, a biologist, and we talk about cosmology, which is like, Big Bang Theory, then I and he are both relying on our personal reading and what classes we may have took at the undergraduate level or something like that. Okay,
that's right.
And so we're talking as, and the fact that, he knows how to do something in a lab and I know how to read Greek really doesn't come into play.
Right. And the fact that, let's bring in a third party, the fact that Dawkins is a biologist doesn't mean he knows anything about cosmology.
Right. And even in biology, you can get a doctorate in biology without ever seriously studying the fossil record. You just, if your degree just takes you in a direction that doesn't really relate to the, if it's in, like, say, medical technology or something. And so that is why I think, for example, Dawkins misstates the Cambrian explosion in Blind Watchmaker. And I don't fault him for that, because, when you're writing a book, it's hard to master all that thing, but he does, because it's not really his wheelhouse, So, but we're forced, when, as human beings, we're forced to get out of our wheelhouse in an attempt to make sense of it all.
Well,
right?
We're not even forced. That's just what humans do.
Right.
Right. Like, I'm not an expert in anything, but I have to navigate the world, and it's within my interest to come up with opinions. Right. And so we all do that. And we all speak as if we're infallible when it comes to things like politics. We all are pretty sure that Australia is an island. Like, we all hold views.
Right.
And no one expects us to be experts or to have firsthand knowledge of these things. It's just what we do. We can't not do it. Mm-hmm. The difference is you're relying on experts, whereas most of us don't even do that. We're relying on, like, 4 steps down from the expert. But then
when you do this broad survey, I think the testimony coming from all these different lines of research, converge and say, hey,
that's what the Catechism says. I was just going to look that up about these converging proofs, right?
Yeah, that's
I'm going to look that
fantastic.
up while you.
Yeah. So I for folks that want to go deeper on the quantum stuff, and I know, like, all over YouTube, there's a lot of resistance to understanding the quantum the quantum dynamics as involving consciousness, because it's counterintuitive, and there's a lot of people that like the deterministic worldview.
Right.
And they want to say, no, quantum mechanics doesn't challenge the classical view. It doesn't challenge Newtonianism.
Well, I mean, these are
but it
different.
does.
They're different. This gets us full circle to the beginning of our discussion, talking about these different epistemological paradigms. Like you can explain everything away if you refuse to let it within the size you'll grant it. You know what I mean? If you reduce everything, like Daniel Dennett tried to do this with consciousness.
Right.
If you don't, yeah. Depending on how you're looking at something,
reductionism.
Reductionism
is dangerous because you don't get the broad scope of what's going on. But in terms of minds being involved with bodies or material reality, as Christian believers, when we have believed as Catholics in, for example, the presence of evil spirits, who can. Who in the phenomena of exorcism, which has been very well documented, and Father Gabriel Amorth has, a couple of books. You've had exorcists on the show.
Father Lambert,
right?
Written for the St. Paul Center or the Emmaus Road.
Yeah. So this is a phenomena that happens, and obviously, we don't like videotape these things out of respect for the dignity of the persons involved. But we know that disembodied consciousnesses have been observed to inhabit bodies and control their motions. So that's a mind over matter kind of thing. One case that has been highly documented was an exorcism that took place in the Diocese of Gary, Indiana, that was documented by the Indianapolis Star, known as the Indy Star for short. And it was a mother and her two sons and a grandmother, and they were living together in a home that you and I would probably agree was what we would call haunted. Okay, and they were living in this home, and they were getting supernatural manifestations from the children, and the mom and the grandma were both interviewed on camera later, describing how the children would be writhing in pain as their bodies would be distorted from the movement of whatever was controlling them, etc. And the mother and the grandmother, who had custody of these two boys, were worried that the boys were ill with something beyond what they knew, and if they didn't get them help, they might get taken away from Child Protective Services. So they took the boys to the hospital, and there in the triage room, in the presence of the mother, the grandmother, and as I recall, there was a nurse and an orderly and maybe a security guard present. And in the presence of these adults, these boys were seen to walk backwards up the wall and stand on the ceiling, and then jump from the ceiling to the floor. Okay, so this is observed, all right, and the adults did what you expect of medical professionals. They ran out of the room screaming and tried to find a priest. Okay, so in any event, maybe I'm not doing justice, but anyway, the whole thing has been documented, and there's a video that the Indy Star produced interviewing some of the characters in this whole episode, including the mom and the grandmother and the landlord and the priest, who's from the Diocese of Gary, who ultimately performed the exorcism of the boys and the mother, okay, that granted them freedom, and that's all documented. So why am I bringing that up? I'm saying this is a phenomena that is apparent to our senses, that's been documented by third-party observers that were not religiously motivated, etc. And you have a phenomena that only lends itself to the interpretation of disembodied consciousnesses taking over a human body and controlling its movements, right? So that is in accord with, the effect of consciousness on the behavior of particles, for example. It's all testifying to us that there is non-material reality out there. And that mind can exist apart from a body, right? So we would say as Catholics, a demonic mind, right, that can take control of a body in the case of of possession, right? And again, documented. But then there's other instances of minds existing apart from bodies or functioning apart from bodies. So another favorite book of mine, Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven. This is, Eben Alexander was I believe he's still alive, a neurosurgeon who taught brain surgery at Harvard Medical School. Okay, don't get much more exalted than that, right? So he taught brain surgery, and then I believe he retired, as I understand, from Harvard Medical School and was practicing in Virginia, and he contracted an illness himself, a very rare illness, one of these so-called brain-eating bugs. Okay, and it ate the cortex, as I remember, off of his brain, which is usually fatal. For Alexander, what happened is he went into a coma, basically brain death, for a week. But while he was, medically brain dead, or there wasn't any neurological activity taking place in his brain, he had an experience of what he calls heaven. Okay. He went into, whatever you want to call it, went into heaven. He was greeted by this woman that escorted him around in the life to come, if you will. He encountered what he believed to be God, etc. Had all of these mental experiences, right? And then his family, sorry, a little choked up here. His family, who were, I believe they were Episcopalians, were just praying for him. And they, so to speak, prayed him down. Okay. And he recalls this experience. He got called back down to inhabit his body. And he writes about it, writes about the whole experience. So he's having these mental experiences while he was medically, no brain activity going on. And he himself was like a scientific medical skeptic. He did not believe in out-of-body experience. He didn't believe in any of this stuff. Was not a practicing religious person himself. I believe his wife was kind of nominally Episcopalian, but he didn't practice. So but he had this experience himself. And again, I refer people to the book. And, and so that's, many people have had out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. And for more information on that, I'd refer to the work of, again, Father Spitzer.
I'd also point people to Jimmy Akin's work, Mysterious World. He's done recent episodes on near-death experiences.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so there's many that are documented and really kind of mind-blowing, especially the ones that I believe Father Spitzer uses the language of veridical experiences. That means that the person comes back from the experience with information that can be verified.
That they shouldn't have known.
That they should not have known. Like, I know there's a famous case where...
There's a roof on the...
a
shoe on the roof of the hospital.
A shoe on the roof of the hospital kind of... Yeah, exactly. And so you have that. So again, that's another piece of evidence. Like, why should we ignore people's testimony? Why should we tell everybody that has these experiences that they're crazy? Yeah. Thousands of people have these experiences. Yeah. Are they all liars? I don't think that's right. And so to have a
epistemic humility in the face of what we don't understand that goes contrary to our worldview, our epistemological system.
Sure. It seems, it does seem like arrogance to adopt a view of reality that requires you to then say to all these people that, oh no, you're either lying or you're mistaken or this is an illusion.
Religious quack.
Yeah, all of this. And what is it testifying to? It's testifying to, among other things, the presence of spiritual realities, of minds that operate apart from the body. Yeah. Okay. So when we come back to this and we're doing brain research and so on, so many people working in brain research just think that, well, it's just that the mind is nothing but an epiphenomena of the brain. That means like a worthless byproduct of the brain. So you got the brain is doing chemical things here and it produces this illusion, which we call the mind, but the mind doesn't actually do anything. It's just the brain. Well, in light of all this other information, like quantum mechanics and out-of-body experiences and demonic possession, it's like, why are we going into brain studies with this assumption that that the mind is nothing other than an illusion created by matter and energy. It doesn't seem to me to hold water. So when you line this all up, everything from out of body experiences to the Big Bang, it's coming together to make a strong case that there's consciousness outside of material reality, that consciousness doesn't depend on matter for its existence.
Right.
That there's there's intelligence and purpose in the universe, and
Yeah. What's interesting is in the Summa Theologiae, Aquinas obviously has two arguments against God's existence. One of them isn't really an argument, right? So he's got the problem of evil, and then he has the God hypothesis is superfluous because we can account for things through, right, which he disagrees with both. The reason I say that's not a good argument is, like, even if it were superfluous, it wouldn't show that it's false,
right?
Kind of thing. Like, even if you could account for all natural things, that doesn't show that God doesn't exist. Doesn't seem to me.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, because the more I think about it, the more I'm pretty convinced that there is not a lot of good arguments against God's existence. I think of things like maybe the problem of the hiddenness of God, but it would seem to me that's like a subset of the problem of evil. But then you'll have atheists, it seems to me, in the face of this evidence, kind of grasping at straws, because I'll say something like, yes, okay, there have been near-death experiences like the ones you're talking about, but their views of heaven differ, and they don't necessarily say they see Jesus, and some people may even see something that's contrary to what you expect in heaven. It's like, yeah, well, so what? I mean, the one thing that doesn't prove is atheism. So now, so what does it prove? It proves that
they're interpreting their experience in different ways.
Yeah. Well, another thing is when people say, well, there are miracles that occur in other religions. Why don't you give them a fair shake? You're like, fine, I'll accept them.
That's fine.
Now what?
Right. Yeah. And the sorcerers of Egypt, did things, and I don't doubt it either, because spirits can, affect physical reality. So I agree with you, but so I think when you look at the overall evidence, if you're going to take the atheistic materialist worldview, you have to flee all this evidence. You have to not explain things. You have to explain everything away. You've got to explain away the evidence of the Big Bang. You've got to explain away the fine tuning. You got to try to explain away the dynamics of quantum physics
and the origin of life
and everything. And so you're fleeing from the evidence, making moves like the promissory materialism is like, give me time and I'll find a way to explain it.
Yeah.
And I found this in conversation. I had a long email conversation with an atheist in Virginia who lived quite close to the University of Virginia, which is in, let me get this right, Charlottesville, I believe. And the University of Virginia is interesting, actually, because they have an institute for like near-death studies or something like there. It's one of the few institutions of higher learning in the country that actually studies that kind of phenomena. And I kept presenting these kind of veridical experiences where the person comes back with information that can be verified and so on. And I said, like, how do you explain this from an atheist materialist? And he was just very honest. He said, I don't know. All right. Okay, fine. All right. And that's acceptable. We cannot understand things, and we can, we can just be honest that some data doesn't fit our paradigms, but then don't impose your paradigm on somebody else. Okay. Don't get all in my face, and tell me I'm a bad person because I believe in a God. You know what I mean? Like then if you're going to take the out that I just don't know and so on, then please, Bill Nye too, take a live and let live approach to folks that don't share your view of reality. Does that make sense?
Of course it does.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if
I understand why atheists are weary of Christians in this sense. I think an atheist would be happy to say, look, you believe whatever the heck it is you want to believe. You can believe that this book that was written over the course of thousands of years is the inspired word of God, whatever. I don't think that's what they object to. I think, in fairness to them, what they object to is they know that what we believe is going to eventually interfere with them, especially as we gain political power.
Right. Yeah.
And they're not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's the realm of politics when we have to all get together and say, hey, we're a community, and we have to come up with rules for the community. Yeah. And then if you do believe that there's a God, you have a different, it usually ends up influence you to take a different view of morality, and that includes
which again,
public
this
morality.
gets back to what we said earlier. I think this is why pantheists are maybe permitted.
Yeah. Pantheism rarely commits you to a certain moral view.
Yeah.
But usually personal theism typically does, because there's a sense that you're going to have to give an account to this God.
There's an analogy here. We talked about running away from reality, or at the beginning of this discussion, we talked about being hit in the head with reality and how many times that have to happen before you realize, all right, there's something there. I got to change how I think. This is true in the realm of morality too. I mean, how many of us have done egregious, shameful things and then sought to, justify that?
Right.
Like, it's your fault, it's not my fault. And
gaslighting.
I mean, and even if you're not willing to say that you were guilty of that, haven't you known people? Haven't you read stories of people who maybe went to their grave, thinking that they were right all along? And the point is, they came up with this sort of epistemological paradigm that within it did make sense. Like, they were the victim. They were justified in how they reacted. And it's like, well, what's going to get you out of this insanity? Well, reality. There's got to be some sort of repentance. And it seems to me that there's something similar. If I'm within this sort of insane atheistic worldview, that it's more than just putting God up on the chalkboard until the evidence sways more in the direction of God. I think the Christians are right that there has to be some sort of repentance morally.
Yeah.
Laying down my arms and confessing I'm a sinner.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think oftentimes our resistance to belief in God, and resistance to belief in God doesn't need to take the form only of formal atheism. It can be true among us as Catholics, in the sense of not trusting God, or not taking him at his word, or not really believing his word, et cetera. So it's kind of so there's degrees of resistance to God's existence and and what he has communicated to us, right? And oftentimes the resistance to that, to acknowledgement of his presence and his will, is ultimately rooted in the will and not the intellect, and it's moral, right? Mm-hmm. And but that's a sobering thought for all of us, and unfortunately, I think that many of us have probably witnessed people who have gone to their deaths not being willing to acknowledge, some of the wrong and the hurt that they have done to others. And that is, that's scary, because it's like when you stand before Jesus, you're going to have to agree with him about what the truth is. Right. And you can't stand there in front of Jesus and keep insisting that it was your wife's fault that the marriage broke up, and not, the fact that you had an affair or something like that, or any number of examples that we could give. Right. And so, and so this, it frightens me, because if you can see somebody else, who's kind of living in a cocoon, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Okay. And then I say, boy, am I in a cocoon?
Oh, that terrifies me.
Right. And that's why I'm thankful for the resources of the Catholic faith. I'm thankful for the sacraments. I'm thankful for confession. I'm thankful for spiritual direction. I'm thankful for all these
writings of the saints,
right?
The sanest people who ever lived,
right? And then the anchoredness of this universal church, our universality helps us, even apart from all the graces that God gives to his one true church. Just the fact that we're so many different cultures and we can kind of balance each other out. So if one culture gets into like a collective cocoon, right now, it's like, hey, you guys are nuts, okay?
Yeah, like the Germans.
Right, exactly, all right? The rest is because, hey, come on, get with reality, okay? And so that helps us. And of course, there's obviously the graces and the promises of our Lord is ultimately, because we could get in one, common human group think. And that's what happens at the Tower of Babel, right? All of humanity gets into a group think in Genesis 11, right? But God breaks through to that. But Matt, what I'm saying is that we need to really lean into the sacraments, especially the sacrament of reconciliation. We need to take advantage of the opportunities for spiritual direction, for fraternal correction, that are present in the universal church as well as in the local church, and like you said, the writings of the saints, the catechism, okay, and try to live and believe in communion with the rest of the church, because it's an antidote to the danger of the bubble, right?
Yeah.
Of not allowing reality to break in. Yeah.
This has been so great, and I'm so grateful for your time and all that you've shared. I've already mentioned my book, Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the Five Ways of Thomas Aquinas. You've got a million books here, but
right.
give us just a couple. You've written a book here.
Yeah, I've written a book. So this book, Yes, There Is a God, and Other Answers to Life's Big Questions. Obviously, you can see a little bit of inspiration from Flu's book. But I was taking is try to, Flu's conversion and break it down into stick figures and
That's
various
my level.
kinds.
Thank you.
Yeah. And make it just easy and lighthearted, deal with some very, very serious subjects in a lighthearted way. So that book deals with heaven and hell, how could a good God send anybody to hell? But basically the book asks three questions: why God, why Jesus, why the Catholic Church? And knowing that I only have people's attention for a few moments in this, social media internet age.
This looks wonderful.
Yeah, I try to break the basic arguments down into like a single page, a page and a half. And I know that folks that are, deep into different areas of science and philosophy aren't going to be satisfied with just a page and a half. But I got to keep things moving, right?
Yeah, it's not meant to satisfy them.
I need to present the trajectory in a quick way. There's value in going quickly through the stages of thought and not getting bogged down too much at any one level, so you can see it all in one grasp. But I eventually try to make the argument that there's good reasons to think there's a God. Once you believe that there's a God, there's a good reason to think that Jesus is the best spokesman of God in human history. And once you believe that Jesus is the best spokesman for God in human history, there's a lot of good reason to think that the Catholic Church has done the best job of retaining fidelity to his teaching.
Sheldon Vanauken. You familiar? He has a beautiful poem, probably has many, and there's this one stanza that comes to mind. Between the probable and proved there yawns a gap. Afraid to jump, we stand absurd, then see behind us sink the ground, and worse, our very standpoint crumbling. Desperate dawns, our only hope, to leap into the shuttered word, which opens up the shuttered universe. I love that.
That's beautiful.
Isn't that lovely?
Oh, allow me to applaud.
Yeah.
That's
just this idea of like, where am I going to go? Like, what are my options?
Yeah. That's
there's got to be a leap, like we're talking about.
On the cover of the book, there's two people. One's my alter ego, and then the reader, and we're on the planet Earth. We're on the third rock from the sun, hurtling through space. We have limited time. We've got to make a decision.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the point. And so what I'm trying to say is,
choose
common
God.
Sense interpretation of the facts. But I'm trying to say that, common sense does lead us, though, I think, to the Catholic Church, actually.
All right, we should wrap up. This has been so fun. Thank you very much. Thank you, Josiah.
All right. Thanks, Matt.